Chapter 1. The Demo Girl. For 10 years, I wrote the songs that made another woman a star. Nobody knew. That was the deal. A songwriter is invisible the way a shadow is. Everyone sings along to your words in the car, at the wedding, at the funeral, and not one of them ever learns your name. They will say anything in front of the girl in the back of the studio, the one they call the demo singer, because a demo singer is furniture with a nice voice. I learned more about who people really are at 3 in the morning, in a vocal booth with the red light on, than I learned in 12 years of every contract I was told to sign and never read aloud. Tonight they sat me in the last row, behind the +1s and the publicists, and told me to clap when Celeste won. They were about to give the biggest award in music to a woman who has never written a single line. And the name in the sealed nomination, the real author of record, was mine. But that was tonight. And tonight was still 2 days off, and I am getting ahead of the story the way I never let myself get ahead of a melody. Let me put you where I actually was when this began. Let me put you in the room. It was 3:11 in the morning, and the studio was breathing. That is the only way I know to describe it. Studio C at Halden Sound was a windowless box the size of a small chapel, and at that hour it had a pulse of its own. The low amber hum of the tube amps warming in the rack, the soft 60-cycle sigh under everything, the click of the console cooling and ticking like an engine after a long drive. The good rooms are alive. People who work daylight jobs think a recording studio is a place you go to make noise. It isn't. It's a place you go to be quiet with other people. So quiet you can hear a singer swallow before a line. So quiet the room itself starts to sound like it's about to say something. I had a paper cup of coffee gone cold at my elbow and a pair of headphones around my neck that weighed more than they should, the way good ones do, the way anything you've carried for years does. On the other side of the glass, in the vocal booth, the red record light was on. Nobody was singing. The booth was empty. I'd turned the light on myself out of habit or superstition, or something older than both. When the red light is on, the room tells the truth. Musicians drop their shoulders. Engineers stop performing competence and start doing it. And the people who only ever perform, the ones who are all surface, all posture, furniture with expensive shoes, they get restless, because the red light is a kind of nakedness, and they can't stand to be seen without a mirror. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. My grandmother used to say something close to that, though she said it about God and I say it about people, which she would have told me was the same sentence with the volume down. Eleanor Vance played piano for a gospel choir for 40 years and wrote songs the church sang without ever once knowing a woman's hand had made them. And she taught me the first true thing I ever learned about this business, long before it was a business to me. A song is a true thing you leave behind. She meant it as comfort. I have spent 12 years learning it can also be a weapon if you're patient, and I am nothing if not patient. I hummed a line into my phone. Just a scratch, 3 notes down, a lift, a fall, the shape of a chorus that had been circling me for a week like a moth I couldn't quite catch. I sang it soft into the little microphone at the bottom of the screen, the way I'd hummed 10 years of them, in parking garages and stairwells and this exact chair. And then I saved it into a folder I do not let anyone open, and I never, ever play out loud when there is another person in the building. There were 3 notes in it. There are always 3 notes in it. Same 3 every time, buried where nobody listens, under the last chorus, in the backing vocals. 1 voice among the stacked 8, singing a word you'd never catch unless you already knew it was there. I put it in everything I make. It is the closest thing I have to a signature, and it is registered, filed, dated, notarized in a place I will get to, under a name that is not the name on my ID and not the name they call across the studio when they want coffee. That's enough of that for now. I told you I don't get ahead of the melody. You're doing the ghost thing again, Leo said. Leo Asante came in without knocking, because in 14 years I had never once heard Leo knock. He had 2 coffees and the particular walk of a man who has been awake since a yesterday that no longer technically exists. Leo ran Pro Tools and sang backup and fixed the coffee machine when it died, which was constantly. And he was the only person in the building who talked to me like I was a person and not a piece of gear that occasionally needed a battery. He set the fresh cup down next to my cold one, an act of small mercy, and dropped into the second chair. The ghost thing, he said again. Sitting in the dark, red light on, nobody in the booth, You look like a woman waiting to haunt somebody. I'm listening, I said. To what? It's empty. To the room. You can hear when it's honest. He gave me a look I'd been getting from Leo for a long time, half amused, half something he never said out loud, a kind of squint, like there was a word on the tip of his tongue that he kept deciding not to spend. You, he said, are the strangest person I have ever loved, and I have met a xylophone player. I let myself smile, which I do about twice a night and only for Leo. Here is the thing you have to understand about the room, because the room is the whole story, and if you don't feel about it the way I feel about it, then none of what came after will land the way it should. The room is not the building. The room is the people who make the sound. It's Leo at the console at 3 a.m. It's the session players, the guitarist with the cracked thumbnail who can play the same 4 bars 200 times and find something human in the 201st. The string quartet who drive in from 2 hours out for scale plus a sandwich. The backup singers who stack 8 voices into one shimmering wall and then go home to jobs that have nothing to do with music because music won't feed them alone. It's the writer's room down the hall, 6 desks and a whiteboard and a coffee machine Leo keeps alive by force of will, where kids come in with more talent than sense and give away the best lines they'll ever write for a credit that says, additional production. They are the most skilled people I have ever known and the least visible. The world hums their work at weddings and never learns one name. I know exactly how that feels. I have made a study of exactly how that feels. I grade them, you should know. It's a habit I can't break and wouldn't if I could. In my head, I keep a ledger, and every person who moves through this building, from the label president down to the kid emptying the shred bin, gets a mark on it eventually. Not for talent. Talent I can hear in 4 bars. I grade them on one thing only. How they treat the people who can do nothing for them. How they behave when the red light is on and the powerless are watching and they think nobody who matters can see. It's a simple grade. There are only 2 marks. Pass, fail. It's not a kind system. It doesn't grade on a curve and it doesn't take excuses, and it never, ever forgets a score once it's written. I have been keeping it for 12 years. Most of the industry doesn't know they've been sitting an exam their whole careers. The door opened again, softer this time, a knock, actually, which was so unusual I turned, and a girl put her head in. Sorry, she said. Sorry, I saw the light. I didn't know anyone was in C. You're fine, I said. Come in or don't, but decide. You're letting the good air out. She came in. Kira Shaw was maybe 23, an intern in the writer's room, though intern is a word the label used to mean person we get for free. She had a battered spiral notebook clamped under one arm, the way you'd hold something you'd run into a fire for, and the specific, hollow-eyed look of someone who had learned that the only time the good rooms were free was the middle of the night, and so the middle of the night was when she came to work on the songs that were actually hers. I recognized that look. I own a mirror. I finished the bridge, she said to nobody, to the room, and then catching herself to me, apologetic. Like finishing a bridge were something to say sorry for. The one for it doesn't matter. I just needed to hear it out loud somewhere real. My headphones make everything sound like it's underwater. Sing it, I said. She blinked. It's rough. Everything true is rough. Sing it. She looked at Leo, who spread his hands as if to say, I'm not the strange one. She is. And then Kira Shaw closed her eyes in the middle of a room she was scared she wasn't allowed to be in. And she sang 8 bars of a bridge she'd written for a song that would eventually have somebody else's name on it, and I stopped grading her about 3 notes in. It was good. Not polished. She rushed the turnaround. She was already flinching toward the resolution before she'd earned it, the way the young do, but under the nerves was the real thing. The thing you can't teach and can't fake and can't, God knows, manufacture, though this whole building was one long, expensive attempt to manufacture it. There was a true line in there. She'd built it to give away, and it was better than 3/4 of what got sold with a star's face on the cover. Pass, said the ledger, in the ink it never uses lightly. Pass. That's yours? I asked when she finished. For the new, yeah. I mean, it'll be Celeste's probably. If they take it. They put it through the room and it comes out with everybody's name and none of them are mine. She said it lightly. She said it the way you say a thing you've decided not to let hurt you, which is a different thing entirely from a thing that doesn't hurt. That's how it works. Silas says everybody starts in the shadows. Silas Croft, the old engineer, the one who'd been working the back rooms of this business since before it had my song in it. I filed the name and the tenderness in her voice against it, quietly, the way I file everything. He's right that everybody starts there, I said. He's wrong if he told you everybody leaves. She laughed, not sure if she was allowed to. Leo didn't laugh at all. He was watching me with that squint again, that word on his tongue, and I looked away first, which I almost never do. Go home, Kira, I said. It's good. It's better than good and you know it, which is why you brought it here at 3 in the morning instead of showing it to somebody who could steal it in the daylight. Smart. Keep being that smart. Write your best lines in the dark until you own the room they're heard in. And never, ever give away the one that's really yours. She looked at me a long second, like she was going to ask something, and then didn't, and gathered her notebook against her chest and went. The door sighed shut. The room breathed. The red light burned on over the empty booth. You like her, Leo said. I like the kid she reminds me of. Who's that? I picked up the fresh coffee. It was still warm. Small mercies. Nobody, I said. Somebody who doesn't work here anymore. He let it go. That's the other thing about Leo. He always let it go, right up until the night, months later, that he didn't. Here is where I have to tell you about the phone call, because everything that happened after happened because of it, and because it is the exact moment the ground I'd been standing on for 10 years quietly turned to ice. It was maybe an hour later. Leo had gone to lie down on the couch in the lounge, the way he did between 4 and 6, and I was alone in C with the console and the cold coffee I hadn't thrown out because I never throw out the cold one. Some superstition about not throwing away the hours it stood for. I'd stepped into the darkened hallway to stretch, headphones still around my neck, and the light was off. And that is the thing about being furniture. They don't turn on the light for furniture, and they don't lower their voices for it either. 2 men were in the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. I knew them by shape before I knew them by sound. Julian Hayes, the label president, silver, smooth, the kind of handsome that is really just money worn on a face. A man who could weep on cue at a memorial and mean the tears and forget your name in the same breath. And on speaker, tinny, from a phone lying on the glass table. A voice I didn't know, cool and unhurried. The voice of a man who has never once had to raise it because the world has always leaned in. I stood in the dark and I did what I do. I listened. The whole catalog, Julian was saying. Masters and publishing both, everything under the Halden umbrella, 10 years of it. It's clean. The talent's on work for hire paper going back a decade, so there's nothing to unwind. And the writing team, the cool voice said. Not a question. Restructured. Julian said the word the way you'd say a word you'd practiced in a mirror. Post-close. We're not going to need a room full of writers to license a catalog into placements. That's the whole thesis. You buy the songs, you cut the people. The songs don't ask for health insurance. A little laugh pleased with itself. We keep Celeste out front through the ceremony for the optics. She wins her award, the market sees the trophy, the valuation holds, and then it's your problem. The room gets cleaned out the week after. Quiet. Nobody left to make noise. The ceremony's Thursday, the voice said. Thursday night. Signing's set to close alongside it. Before the show, actually, so the announcement lands clean the morning after. Symmetry. Julian liked the word symmetry. Award and acquisition, same 48-hour window. My board loves a story. 36 hours then, said the cool voice, and I felt the number go into me like a temperature drop. Have the papers where I can reach them. They'll be in your hand before the lights go down, Julian said. Pleasure as always. The call ended. I did not move. Julian Hayes stood alone in the lit glass box at the end of a dark hall and stretched his arms over his head like a man who'd just closed something that would pay for a second house. And he did not know, could not have conceived, that anyone was watching, least of all the demo girl. Because to Julian Hayes, I was not a person who could watch. I was a function. I was the thing that made the rough vocal so the real vocal could be sold. That is the great, stupid, beautiful flaw in men like Julian. They decide you are no one, and having decided it, they perform their whole true selves in front of you, because an audience of no one isn't an audience at all. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. Julian Hayes had just handed me his ledger grade in the dark unasked, and it was not a passing one, and he would go to his grave, professionally speaking, never knowing he'd sat the exam. Fail. Verse by verse, I would come to grade him. But that morning in the dark, I just wrote the first mark. I want to be precise about what I understood standing there, because I have had a long time to be precise about it, and precision is the only luxury a ghost is allowed. They were selling the room. Not the building, the room. Leo at the console, the guitarist with the cracked thumbnail, the string players who drove 2 hours for a sandwich, the backup singers stacking 8 voices into one, Kira Shaw and her notebook and her true line, and every kid who'd come after her. 10 years of songs, my songs, though nobody in that glass office could have imagined the word "my" applied to me, were about to be sold off to a buyer with a cool voice, to be gutted and licensed and dripped into ads and cheap compilations until the last human thing in them was worn smooth as a river stone. And the people who made them would be restructured, which is the word the powerful use when they mean erased, because erased is a word with a person still standing in it. The ceremony was the cover. Celeste Thorne would go up on Thursday night and win the Golden Score, the highest honor this business gives a songwriter, drawn, and this is the part they'd all forgotten to be afraid of, from the Rights Society's Registry of Record. And while the whole industry watched a woman thank the heavens for songs she never wrote, the signatures would already be dry on a deal to sell the place those songs were actually made. The award would make the valuation. The valuation would make the sale. The sale would end the room. 36 hours. Adriana Vargas found me still in the hall a few minutes later when the building started to wake, and I was worth her notice for exactly the length of one sentence. Head of PR, sharp as a paper cut. She looked at me the way you look at a chair that has been left in a doorway. "Is the demo situation done in C?" she asked. Not me, the air near me. "Celeste needs the room at 9, and I don't want to smell coffee and whoever this is." She was already looking at her phone. I was already to her a task completed. The help. The demo situation. Furniture with a nice voice. Pass, I thought, watching Kira's light still on down the hall in the writer's room, where the kid had gone back in to work instead of going home, because the room was the only place she felt real, and she didn't know yet they were about to sell it out from under her. Fail, I thought, as Julian Hayes walked past me in the hall, whistling, and did not see me at all. I went back into Studio C, and I sat down at the console, and I turned off the red light, finally, and let the room go dark. My grandmother's voice was in it, and a girl's rough bridge, and 3 notes I've hidden in everything I ever made under a name I have never once said out loud in this building. Somewhere in a Rights Society's cold, indifferent, incorruptible registry, that name held things Julian Hayes did not know existed, held them quietly, legally, patiently, the way you hold a match you have not yet decided to strike. 12 years ago, I wrote something true, and it cost me everything. My name, my voice on my own record, the person I loved, the whole life I thought was mine. I did not break loudly. Loud is what they expect. Loud is what they know how to survive. I went quiet instead. I went underground and I went patient, and I built something in the dark that none of them ever thought to look for. Because you don't look for a rival in the furniture. They had 36 hours to sell the only place that ever felt like home. I had 10 years of practice deciding things in the dark. Chapter 2. Pass/fail. I kept a ledger no one could see, not paper, not a file on a drive someone could subpoena or shred. It lived behind my eyes, and it had 2 columns, and every person who walked through the studio wrote their own name into one of them without ever knowing there was a page. Pass. Fail. I graded them the way my grandmother graded a choir, not on the notes they hit when the room was full and warm, but on the ones they let fall flat when they thought God had stepped out for coffee. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning when the red light is off and only the song is left. That was my whole religion. It was the only thing 12 years hadn't managed to take. The morning after I learned the catalog was being sold, I came in early, because early is when the honest work gets done, and early is when people forget the demo girl is standing in the corner with a headphone cord in her hand. Studio B was still dark when I let myself in. The tube amps had been off all night, and the room smelled of cold coffee and cooling metal, that specific 3 a.m. that lasted until 9 smell I could have found blindfolded in any city on Earth. I flipped the mains. The desk woke up in a slow tide of little green lights. And there, curled in the client chair with her hood up and a legal pad slipping off her knee, was Kira Shaw. She'd slept there. 19 hours in the building and she hadn't gone home. On the pad, in handwriting that got smaller and more frantic toward the bottom of the page, the way a person's does at 4 in the morning, were 7 versions of the same 8 bars. She'd been chasing a lift in the pre-chorus, the place where a song stops describing a feeling and starts being one. And she'd gotten it on the 6th try, and then, because she was the kind of writer they don't make on purpose, she'd kept going to the 7th to see if she could get it cleaner. She had. That was the thing that made my chest hurt. The 7th was better, and no one had asked her for it, and no one would ever know she'd found it. Officially, Kira was an intern. She fetched. She logged sessions. She comped vocals for 11 hours and got her name on nothing, and when a track she'd quietly saved from mediocrity went to radio, the credits read like a guest list she hadn't been invited to. They were grooming her, though they'd never use that word. They were teaching her to give it away and smile, to be the next one of me. I knew the curriculum. I graduated top of the class. I set my coffee down without a sound and I looked at her 7th version, and I did the only thing I could do that wouldn't wake her or embarrass her or put a target on her back. I fixed the 1 bar she'd left rough because exhaustion had finally won. The bass had been walking against the vocal, muddying the exact moment the lift was supposed to land. 3 minutes with the automation and I pulled it back a hair, gave her melody the air it had earned. I saved it under her session name, her initials, dated. Not mine. Never mine. Then I wrote 1 line on a fresh sticky note in block capitals so she couldn't tell whose hand it was and stuck it to the pad. The 7th is the one. Trust it. She'd wake and think a ghost had passed through and believed in her, which was accurate enough. Kira Shaw. Pass. I didn't even have to think about it. Some people you grade in the dark before they've said a word to you, because kindness in an empty room is the only kind that counts, and craft you do when no one's watching is the only craft that's real. She had both. She'd have given the 7th version away to anyone who asked and never mentioned the other 6. That's not weakness. That's the whole job. God help her. I was still standing over her when Julian Hayes's voice came down the hall like warm honey poured over broken glass. I stepped back into the corner where the mic stands lived. Furniture with a nice voice, back among the furniture. Julian came past the glass of Studio B with a phone against his ear, and a young writer named Perez, half jogging to keep up beside him, holding a folder Julian wasn't looking at. If you'd seen Julian Hayes on a panel, and everyone had, he collected panels the way other men collect watches, you'd have thought he was the best friend the working songwriter ever had. He said, "Our writers," the way pastors say, "our congregation." He'd tell a journalist, unprompted, that a label was nothing but the people in the back rooms, and he'd mean it right up until the light on the camera went dark. He hung up. He did not slow down. Perez managed to get out half a sentence, something about the room needing another week on the ballad, the players needing to know if their sessions were confirmed past the ceremony, and Julian stopped and turned and gave him a smile I'd have paid money to keep off a child's face. "Let me explain the writer's room to you," Julian said gently, "the way you explain gravity to someone who's just complained about falling. The writer's room is a cost center. It is the most expensive way in the world to be told a song isn't finished. Nobody in that room is irreplaceable, and the ones who think they are the ones I most enjoy replacing. Confirm nothing. We're not in the business of promising the furniture it gets to stay in the house." He patted the folder Perez was holding, his own folder, that he still hadn't opened, and walked on. "Get me the trades." Perez stood there a second with the word furniture landing on him. Then he went back to work because that's what you do, and I watched him decide, right there in the hall, to give it away and smile. The curriculum. It never missed. Julian Hayes. Fail. I'd graded him years ago, honestly, but I like to remark the exam every so often in case a man surprises me. He never surprised me. He was consistent the way rot is consistent. Charming to the room with the camera, contemptuous of the room with the talent, and now, pushing a sale that would empty the building of everyone who'd ever made him a dime. What I hadn't had yesterday was the why. Men like Julian don't gut a thing that's still profitable out of spite. Spite is free. This was expensive. Somebody was paying. I filed that under things to find out and went to track a demo because the demo still had to get tracked, and because the corner by the mic stands has the best acoustics in the building for hearing what people say when they've forgotten you're standing in it. I was 3 takes into a scratch vocal for a mid-tempo thing the room was calling paper weather when the door to the A suite down the hall opened and didn't quite close, and the sale walked in. I didn't hear the buyer. Not that morning. I want to be clear about what I actually had, because I'd spent 10 years learning the difference between what you know and what you can prove, and the gap between them is where people like me either survive or don't. What I heard was Julian and Adriana Vargas and a third voice on speakerphone that was smooth and unhurried and belonged to no one in the building. A lawyer's voice, or a lawyer's client's, the kind of voice that has never once had to raise itself. I kept my headphones on. I kept the red light on. If you're recording, you have a reason to be in the booth with the door cracked, and no one questions the demo girl doing the one thing she's for. I laid down another take of paper weather, clean, and under the sound of my own voice in the cans, I heard the shape of it. The value isn't the artist, the speaker voice was saying. It's the structure. 140 titles that pay whether anyone remembers who sang them or not. Sync, compilation, licensing in perpetuity. You strip the overhead, Adriana's voice, here, saying the overhead like it was a stain, and the asset performs. The asset. 140 songs. I knew that number the way you know your own address. I'd bled into most of it, and they were pricing it like square footage, like a warehouse full of a thing that used to be alive. Then Julian, warm again, closing, "The room won't be a problem. We restructure before the ink's dry. By the time anyone's asking questions, the questions have nowhere to go." I got to the end of the take. I let the last note ring the way you're supposed to, and in the tail of it, so quiet the compressor barely caught it, I sang 3 notes under the melody, the same 3 I always buried, the little descending figure my grandmother used to hum when she was pleased with a line and wanted no one to notice she was pleased. Nobody in that building could have told you it was there. It was there. It was on every hit they were about to sell like square footage, sitting under the shine where no stage light ever reached, a signature in a language they'd never bothered to learn. I sang it, and I saved the take, and I wrote the metadata myself, careful as a prayer. They were selling my whole life to a voice on a speakerphone. I laid it down in 3-part harmony and marked it pass on the only ledger that would ever matter. Celeste Thorne arrived at 11 with a journalist and a bottle of the sparkling water she pretended was a personality. I'd worked with Celeste for the better part of a decade, and I could count on one hand the times she'd looked at me long enough to register a face. That was fine. That was, in fact, the entire arrangement, the thing that let me stand in her sessions and hear everything. To Celeste, I was a function, the voice that got the melody into shape before hers went over the top of it, the ghost that made the ballad singable so she could sing it. She had a real voice. I'll give her that much and no more. It was a pretty instrument and an empty room, and for 10 years I'd been the one furnishing it. The journalist was young and eager and had a recorder out, and Celeste was doing what Celeste did best, which was play a songwriter for someone who'd never met one. "People ask me where the songs come from," she was saying, arranging herself on the couch like light through a good window. "And the honest answer is, they come from living. You can't fake what I put into these. I write from the ache, you know? I write from the parts of me that hurt." I was in the corner with a cable coiled over my shoulder, close enough to see the recorder's little red dot, and I thought, she doesn't even know what the ache in that chorus was about. She'd never asked. She'd sung the line about the December cold that 50 million people had cried to in their cars, and never once wondered whose December it was. The journalist asked her about the new single, my single, Paper Weather, the one I'd been scratch-tracking an hour before, and whether it was true she was as involved in the writing as the label claimed. Celeste smiled the smile she saved for print. "Here's a thing people don't understand," she said. "There's a difference between someone who scribbles words on a page and an artist. A demo is nothing. A lyric sheet is nothing. It's furniture until somebody makes it a home." She spread her hands, generous, letting the young man see how humble genius wore itself. "A song is nothing until the right voice sings it. That's not me being arrogant, that's just the truth of the work. The voice is the song." The journalist wrote it down like scripture. Of course he did. It's a good line. I'd have been proud to write it if it were true, and if I hadn't heard her use it 11 times to erase the 11 people who'd actually done the writing. A song is nothing until the right voice sings it. I turned it over the way you turn over a coin you intend to spend later. Somewhere down a hallway of the years, I'd get to hand that line back to her, verse by verse, with the receipts. Not today. Today I coiled cable, and I kept the ledger, and I let her write her own grade in ink. Celeste Thorne. I didn't even bother marking it. Some verdicts are just the weather. The humiliation when it came the way they always did, casually, in passing, as an afterthought, which is the only truly cruel way to do it. Cruelty that costs the cruel person effort at least admits you're a person. It's the effortless kind that tells you what you really are to them. The playback session was crowded. Julian, Adriana, Celeste, the journalist still hovering, 3 of the room's writers, Leo at the desk running Pro Tools with his jaw set the way it got when he was biting something back. They were listening to Paper Weather, my scratch vocal, the one I'd tracked that morning because the room hadn't had time to get Celeste's comps done, and my guide vocal was carrying the song. And it was carrying it. I'll say that plainly because no one else in that room ever would. My voice was the reason the chorus landed. Celeste knew it. That was the problem. "Whose vocal is this?" the journalist asked, honest as a stone. "It's gorgeous. The tone on the bridge." The room went the particular kind of still that means someone's about to be reminded of their place. Adriana Vargas got there first, because that was Adriana's function, the way clearing a road of anything inconvenient is a plow's function. She laughed, light and bright, the laugh she used to make a knife sound like a party. "Oh, that's just the demo girl," Adriana said. "She does the scratch tracks. Don't get attached. She's not on the record." A beat. Then, to Julian, sotto voce, but not so sotto that I wasn't clearly meant to hear it, the thing that was really being said. "Honestly, don't let her near the actual mic. It confuses people. We can't have the furniture singing lead." Celeste laughed too. That was the part I keep. Not the words. Words are cheap, and Adriana dealt in cheap. But Celeste's laugh over the top of them, warm and easy. The laugh of a woman who has never had to wonder if the thing she's laughing at is a person. "It's a placeholder," Celeste told the journalist kindly, the way you'd explain a mannequin to a child who'd waved at one. "We put a guide vocal down so I have something to sing against. It's a technical thing. The song doesn't start until I sing it." She looked at me then. Actually looked, for the first time in months, 1 full second, and there was nothing in it. Not contempt. Contempt is a relationship. There was just the flat blank of a person clearing a placeholder off a track. "Thanks, hun. We'll take it from here. The demo girl, the furniture, the placeholder. Here is what I did with that, and I want it on the record because it's the only immortal thing I ever managed in that building, and it looks like nothing at all." I nodded. I said, "Sure, it's all yours." I picked up my coffee and I stepped back to the wall, and I let the wave close over me the way you let cold water close over you when you've decided to swim rather than drown. I absorbed it, every ounce. And while I was absorbing it, standing there being furniture, I was doing the thing furniture is best positioned to do, which is watch the room without the room watching back. I clocked the way Julian didn't correct Adriana and didn't need to. I clocked Adriana checking Celeste's face before she landed the joke, confirming the boss wanted it thrown. I clocked the journalist writing something down that wasn't the quote, some private note, and I filed his face under maybe. And I clocked, because I'd been listening for it all morning, the thing that mattered more than any insult. On the desk beside Julian's phone was a folder, and on the folder was a logo I didn't know, a clean, cold, sans serif thing, and under it, a name half covered by his hand. A buyer's name. The voice on the speakerphone had a shape now, and a piece of a name, and I had spent 10 years learning that a piece is enough if you're patient and you never let them see you counting. The demo girl absorbs the blow. The demo girl pockets the intel. Same motion. They never could tell the two apart, and that, more than anything I ever wrote, was the reason I was still standing. Adriana Vargas. Fail. But a specific fail. The kind I keep a separate column for. The enforcer who checks the boss's eyes before she strikes. Those are the ones who flinch first when the wind changes, because they were never true believers, only weather vanes. I marked her, and I moved on. I found Silas Croft in the machine room at the end of the night, which is where you found Silas, if you found him at all, down among the outboard gear and the patch bays. A man who'd rather talk to a tape machine than a person, because tape machines don't lie about what they heard. He was my age, plus a rough 20 years, and he wore all of them in his hands, which had run more sessions than anyone alive in that building, and which moved over a console the way a pianists move over keys they've loved too long to look at. Silas had engineered the whole history of that room. He'd been there for hits I'd written and singers I'd made, and he'd never once been fooled about which was which, and he was the only one. He'd heard about the playback. Word travels in a studio faster than sound. He didn't say sorry, because Silas knew sorry was a thing you said to people you'd already decided couldn't take it, and he'd decided the opposite about me long ago. He just poured coffee from the pot that was always on and always terrible, and pushed a cup across the console. "That guide vocal," he said, not looking at me, dialing something on a channel that didn't need dialing. "On the bridge." He let it sit. Silas let everything sit. It was how he mixed, and how he talked. "I've cut a lot of records, Alara. I know the difference between a placeholder and a song." He looked up then, over the tops of the glasses that had slid down his nose. "That was the song. They just can't hear it because they've never once in their lives had to." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have given away more than I could afford. "You're the real thing," Silas said, quiet, like it embarrassed him a little to know it out loud. "I don't say that. I've said it about 2 people in 40 years, and I was wrong about one of them. You. I'm not wrong." He turned back to his console, the moment already too big for both of us. "Whatever they call you in there, don't you start believing it." Silas Croft. Pass. Written in the first column in a hand that didn't shake, which was rare enough that I noticed my own steadiness. A man who'd spent a lifetime in the back rooms and used it to see people instead of to stop seeing them. He didn't know what I was. He wouldn't have believed the half of it. But he'd heard 3 buried notes under a scratch vocal that no one was supposed to hear, and he'd called it the song. And for 1 second in a building that thought I was furniture, I was a writer with a witness. I drove home under a sky the color of an unmastered track, and I let myself think, for the length of 1 red light, about the folder on Julian's desk and the cold, clean logo I didn't recognize. Because that was the thing that wouldn't let me sleep. Not the demo girl, not the furniture, not Celeste's borrowed line or Adriana's rehearsed laugh. Those were old weather. I'd been dressing for that storm for a decade. It was the buyer. Julian was a coward, and Adriana a weather vane, and Celeste an empty room with good acoustics, and none of them, alone or together, had the nerve or the reason to torch a catalog that still printed money. Somebody had walked in from outside with an appetite that big. Somebody had put a number on 140 songs and my whole erased life and decided the number was worth it. You don't pay to bury something unless what you're really buying is the silence. Someone wanted the catalog gone badly enough to pay for it. After 10 years of silence, I decided to find out who. Chapter 3, The December Sessions. There is a version of me most people never met. She had her own name on a poster. She was 24, and she believed the truest thing you could do with a life was make something honest and put it into the world with your name attached, the way my grandmother taught me. I buried that girl a long time ago. But there are nights the booth goes quiet, and the red light is off, and only the song is left, and she climbs up out of the ground to look at me. She looks at me the way you look at a stranger who is wearing your face. She was looking at me that night. I had gone home after the studio finally emptied, home being 2 rooms above a shuttered instrument repair shop, rent paid in cash, name on the lease that was not the name I was born with. I made tea I did not drink. I took out the notebook nobody was allowed to read. And instead of writing for the first time in years, I let myself remember all of it, on purpose, start to finish, because the next 36 hours were going to demand that I know exactly what I was and exactly what had been taken, or I would flinch at the wrong moment. Grief is a distraction. I needed it cold. So I went back. 12 years ago, there was a girl named Alara Vance, and she wrote a record called The December Sessions. I need you to understand it was good. Not good the way a proud person says. Good the way a thing is good when it is finished and you can hear it standing on its own without you. 11 songs I wrote across one winter in a rented room with a space heater that ticked and a piano missing the low D. My grandmother's piano had been missing that same note. and I had learned to write around the hole so long ago that the absence had become part of my hand. Eleanor Vance. She played for a gospel choir for 40 years and wrote hymns nobody credited to her because that was simply how it was done then. The songs belonged to the church, to God, to everyone, which is a beautiful lie you tell people so they will hand you the thing they made and thank you for taking it. Before she died, she pressed my hand flat on the closed lid of that piano and told me the only sentence of hers I have kept whole. A song is a true thing you leave behind. Everything else about you is a rumor. So I left one behind. The December sessions. I hummed those melodies into a cheap recorder walking home in the cold, and the cold is why I called it that. And the cold is in every one of them if you listen. They were about my mother, who left before I was old enough to be angry about it, and just in time for me to spend a life writing toward the door she went out of. About leaving a town so small that leaving it felt like a crime you'd be recognized for. About a love I already suspected I would lose because I loved the work more than I knew how to love a person, which turned out to be the one prophecy on the record that came true. I sang them myself then. That is the part that is hard to hold, harder than the theft. Before any of it, there were nights it was only me and a microphone, and the low D that wasn't there, and my own voice going into the dark, and it was mine, whole, the writing and the singing the same act, the way it is supposed to be, the way my grandmother did it at the piano when the choir had gone home and she played for no one. I have not sung a song as mine, out loud, where a person could hear it and know my name, in 12 years. I had forgotten I even wanted to until I let myself remember that I once did it every night without thinking it was a thing that could be taken. I had a partner then. I'll call him what he was to me and no more, the person I built with. He believed in the songs. He also believed in the men who came around once the demo started moving, and that is the difference between us that ended us. The men came from money. Specifically, they came from a fund. I did not know the name then. I know it now. I have spent 10 years learning it, run by a man called Arthur Sterling. Sterling did not care about music. Sterling cared about catalogs the way a man cares about oil fields, something in the ground that pays forever if you own the rights and pay the workers once. His people had a signee they were building, a mid-tier girl with a serviceable voice and an unserviceable amount of ambition, and what she did not have was songs. What I had was songs and no money and no lawyer who would read a contract out loud to me. Her name was Celeste Thorne. 3:40 a.m. I want to be precise about how it was done, because for years I told the story to myself as a robbery, and a robbery is loud and leaves a broken window. This was not that. This was paperwork. They offered to develop the December sessions, a production deal, studio time I could never have afforded, a real engineer, a real room. I remember the room. I remember thinking I had finally been let inside the building I had been pressing my face against. I signed a stack of pages. A smiling lawyer slid across a table, and one of those pages, buried, assigned the publishing to a company I had never heard of and reclassified me from writer to development contributor. I did not read it aloud. My grandmother was already gone, and there was no one left in my life who insisted that you read the thing aloud. The person I built with told me to sign it. He said it was standard. He said we'd made it. We had made nothing. I had made it, and then I gave it away with a pen, in a room that smelled of new carpet, believing it was the beginning. Celeste recorded my songs, my melodies, my words, the ache I put in them about my own mother, sung by a woman who, when I finally heard the record, had smoothed every honest edge off of them until they gleamed like something in a store window. And on the sleeve, in the credits, in the registry of record at the Rights Society, the only place that legally remembers who made a thing, the song said, written by Celeste Thorne. I went to them. Of course I went to them. I had the recorder. I had the earlier demos with the low D missing, my hand around the hole, my voice cracking on the bridge of the third song because I had written it 3 days after the funeral. I had proof, or I thought proof was a thing that mattered. Here is what they did. And it was the most elegant cruelty I have ever seen, and I have studied cruelty as a profession since. They did not deny me. Denial invites an argument, and an argument has 2 sides. Instead, they got there first. Before I could tell anyone, the story was already out ahead of me, tidy and complete. There was an unstable young woman, a development contributor with a grudge, who had latched on to Celeste Thorne and was now claiming she'd written everything. Poor thing. It happens. These fragile ones can't tell the difference between being in the room and making the thing. A credit thief. A fantasist. Difficult. Unmarketable. Unwell. They did not say I was lying. They said I was to be pitied, which is worse, because you cannot fight pity. You can only confirm it by getting angry, and I got angry, and every closed door after that had my anger written on the far side of it as evidence. The person I built with did not stand next to me. He stood a careful step to the side, and then a step further, and then he was gone. And I understood that he had chosen the building over me a long time before I noticed, the way you learn the exact date of a betrayal only after it has finished happening. I lost the songs. I lost my voice on the record, literally. You cannot hear me anywhere on the December sessions as the world received them. I am erased down to the metadata. I lost my name because Alara Vance became a word you said quietly in that industry to mean trouble. And I lost the one belief my grandmother left me, the belief that a true thing leaves you behind, because I had left one behind and watched another woman carry it away with her arms full and her chin up while people threw flowers. That is the wound. I have never said it out loud to a living person. I said it to the notebook, and the notebook said nothing, which is why I trust it. 4:11 a.m. I did not break loudly. I want that on the record too, since we are being precise. I have watched people break loudly, and it is a kind of gift you give your enemies. It lets them file you under the story they already wrote. I broke quietly, which looks from the outside exactly like leaving. I left. I let Alara Vance die in the trade papers. I changed my last name. I changed my hair. I traded contact lenses for glasses because glasses are a wall people don't bother climbing, and I disappeared into the one place I knew no one would look for a credit thief. The bottom of the building. The demo booth. The vocal coaching chair. The furniture with a nice voice. If you want to vanish from an industry, do not leave it. Become the part of it no one sees. I learned that from being a songwriter. A songwriter is invisible the way a shadow is. I just took the lesson further than anyone intended. And then, in the dark, I did the only thing I have ever known how to do. I wrote. But I did not write as Alara Vance, because Alara Vance was radioactive. I registered a pen name with the Rights Society, the same registry that had erased me, which I found funny in a way that does not make a sound. I chose the name for the record they stole and the cold it was made of. Jade Autumn. The first song I wrote as Jade Autumn, I gave away. Anonymous. Sold the publishing outright for money I badly needed, watched a label put it on a nobody who became a somebody overnight, and felt, this is the part I have never been able to explain to the notebook in a way that satisfies me. I felt clean. Because they could not take it from me if I never told them it was mine. You cannot steal what a person has already decided to give up in secret. I had found the one door in that building they could not slam, because I had built it myself and told no one where it was. I wrote another. And another. I got better in the dark than I ever was in the light. Because in the dark there is no one to please. No A&R man softening the honest edge. No smiling lawyer. No poster. Just the song and the true thing under it, and my grandmother's missing low D, which I put into every single one on purpose. A 3-note motif. The hand curling around a hole that isn't there anymore. And buried in the backing vocals, so low you'd think it was noise, one word sung clean. Mine. A signature. A watermark in a place no thief thinks to look, because thieves take the shine and leave the truth. It is registered, too, in the Society's metadata, under Jade Autumn, dated, sealed. I did not know then why I was building proof I never planned to use. I know now. Some part of me was leaving evidence for a trial I did not yet believe I would live to hold. Jade Autumn became the secret pen behind the whole industry. I am not being grand. I am being accurate, and accuracy is the only pride I permit myself. If you have sung along in a car in the last 10 years, in this country, at a wedding or a funeral, there is a fair chance the words were mine, and you have never heard my name. I wrote for people who were kind, and for people who were monsters, and I graded them all, verse by verse, in a ledger only I keep. Pass, fail. Because when you are the invisible one, you find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. And I wrote for Celeste Thorne. 4:44 a.m. Yes, that is the joke at the center of my life, and I have had a decade to stop finding it funny, and I have not managed. Her career survived my songs, and then it stalled, the way a career built on someone else's winter must eventually stall when the winter runs out. So the machine did what the machine does. It went looking for a ghost. And the best ghost in the industry, the one the label's own people whispered about and paid through a wall of shell companies so no name ever touched a poster, was Jade Autumn, was me. For 6 of the last 10 years, the woman who ended my life has been singing my words a second time, and thanking her heart for them in interviews, and telling a journalist, in a room where I stood holding a coffee she did not look at, that a song is nothing until the right voice sings it. She said it to my face. She has said it to my face 100 times. She has never once seen my face. That is the whole education right there. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. I could have burned it all down years ago. People will ask me that, if they ever learn any of this. Why did you wait? Why did you let her? Why 10 years? So let me answer it now, to the notebook, so I am not confused about it when it counts. First, because a public reveal from a known unstable credit thief is not a revelation, it is a relapse. They had built the trap before I could see it. The moment I claimed authorship, I confirmed the diagnosis. I understood that if I ever spoke, I had to speak with something they could not pity away. Not a feeling, not a demo tape, a holding, a wall of paper taller than theirs. So I built the wall. Quietly, across 10 years, through a company with a name that means nothing to anyone. Northlight Publishing. Songwriters who were broke sold me their shares because I paid fairly and asked nothing. Failing small catalogs came up for sale, and I bought them through funds that never mentioned me. And piece by piece, right by right, I acquired the publishing that everyone, Julian, Celeste, the label, Arthur Sterling's people before they died and passed the machine to whoever inherited it, everyone assumed the label owned. They did not own it. For the last several years, the catalog they are so eager to sell has been, in its controlling interest, mine, including the December sessions. I bought back my own stolen winter, 1 cold 0.25% at a time, and no one noticed because no one watches the demo girl's mail. That is the second reason I waited. This was never only revenge. I want to be honest even here, especially here. It was penance. It was a vigil. I could not have the songs back the way they were taken, the credit, the name, the girl with the poster. That woman is dead and I killed her myself to survive. But I could hold the soul of the work in a place the thieves could never reach, and I could stand in the machine in disguise and watch, for 10 years, who the industry really was when it thought only the furniture was listening. I told myself I was a caretaker. I told myself holding the songs was enough. That keeping them from being licensed into oblivion, keeping the room alive, keeping the session players paid, was a life. A quiet ledger, a grade withheld from delivery. I told myself I did not need to hand anyone their report card as long as I could keep marking it. I believed that. For 10 years, I believed a person could hold the truth and never spend it and still call herself alive. Then 2 things happened in the same week, and the wall I built to keep me safe became the only weapon I had. 5:02 a.m. The first was the catalog sale. A real buyer, not the label's usual reshuffle. Someone who wants the songs gutted and licensed into cheap forever. Someone whose name I was still chasing but whose smell I already knew, because I have smelled Arthur Sterling's playbook running before. Buy the talent cheap. Erase the author. Own the catalog. Run it at scale. If that sale closes, the room dies. The writers are restructured. The session players, who are the only family the dead girl left me, are put out on the street. And the December sessions, my winter, my mother, my grandmother's missing note, get sold into an advertisement for something plastic, playing behind a voiceover, forever. I have held those songs soul for 10 years, so no one could do exactly that. The sale is the thing I built the wall to stop. It forces my hand not because I am ready, but because there is no longer a version of waiting that is also a version of protecting them. And the second thing was a girl, Kira Shaw, 19, maybe 20, an intern they treat as disposable, which means they say everything in front of her. I have watched her give up credit she earned because she was too grateful for the room to fight for her place in it. I have watched her stay past 3 in the morning, fixing a track that someone senior will present as their own by 9, and I have watched her be glad to do it. Glad the way I was glad in a room that smelled of new carpet. She writes with the honest edge still on. She hums melodies into her phone walking home in the cold. Last week I found in the shredder bin, because I lock up, because the invisible one has total access to a building that has decided she is no one, the torn pages of a song she had written and then thrown away because someone told her it wasn't a Celeste kind of song. It was better than anything on the December sessions. It had a true thing under it. She threw it away. She is me. She is the girl I buried, walking around alive, with her name still on and her chin still up, and every single door I fell through standing open in front of her, and the same men waiting on the far side of them, holding the same smiling paper. They are already deciding she is a problem. I can hear it in the room. They are going to erase her the exact way they erased me, and she will not see it coming because they never do, because the trap is built to look like an opportunity. I sat in my 2 rooms at 5 in the morning with a tea I did not drink and a notebook full of unsent songs, and I understood that the vigil was over. That holding the truth without spending it was not, in fact, a life. It was just a slower way of letting them win. Because a truth you never spend is a song you never sing, and my grandmother did not press my hand to that piano so I could learn to keep silent beautifully. A song is a true thing you leave behind. Not a true thing you sit on in the dark until it and you are both gone, and the rumor is all that's left. I put the notebook away. I washed the cup. And I made the coldest decision of my life, which is the only kind I have made in 10 years, and the last one I would ever make in the dark. I was going to let them have their awards show. Their stage, their lights, their invited press, their front row of buyers with their coats they hand to the help without looking. I was going to let Celeste Thorne walk to that podium and win Song of the Year for a song I wrote and thank everyone but the woman who made it. I was going to let them schedule the whole execution exactly the way they wanted it. And then, on the one night the entire industry was in the same room and could not look away, I was going to stop being furniture. Because tomorrow, today, now, the window had gone gray while I remembered. Tomorrow, Celeste Thorne was going to sit at a table and put her name to the sale of the catalog. And somewhere in that stack of pages, buried the way it always is, was my winter. My mother. Eleanor Vance's missing low D. The word mine sung so low the thieves called it noise. Celeste Thorne put her name on the songs that ended my life. Tomorrow, she planned to sign away one more. She was not getting a third signature without mine. Chapter 4. The Buyer. Invisibility, I had learned, was not a wound anymore. Somewhere in the 10 years, it had quietly turned into a tool. You cannot search a room that a nobody has already searched for you. You cannot lock a door against the woman who holds the keys, because she is the one they hand the keys to at midnight, along with the trash, the recycling, and the trust they never think to withhold from furniture. They gave me the studio at night. For years, that had been the whole shape of my life. I was the last body in the building. I ran the final vocal comps. I bounced the roughs. I wiped the console. I emptied the coffee that had gone to tar in the pot. I locked up. Adriana Vargas had once said in front of me to a new receptionist, "Ilara closes. She's basically the alarm system with a nicer voice." She meant it as the smallest thing a person could be. She had just handed me total access to every room that mattered and called it a joke about the help. So the night after I decided Celeste Thorne was not getting a third signature without mine, I did what I had trained 10 years to do without leaving a fingerprint. I searched. 11:40 p.m. The floor emptied out in the usual order. The writers first, red-eyed, hugging their laptops like life rafts. Then the A&R kids. Then Adriana on the phone, telling someone the narrative was locked. Then Julian Hayes, last of the daylight people, shrugging into a coat that cost more than a session player made in a quarter, telling me over his shoulder to kill the lights when the ghosts are done. He laughed at his own joke. He did not know he was talking to one. The door sighed shut. The building did the thing buildings do when the last important person leaves. It exhaled and became mine. I did not go to the shredder first. Amateurs go to the shredder first. The shredder is where they put the thing they were afraid of. The real story is in the things they weren't afraid of, because they never once imagined me reading them. I went to the calendar. Julian's assistant kept the shared studio calendar clean and public, bookings, holds, creative summits. But the label ran a second calendar, a leadership one, and the assistant, being 24 and overworked, had synced it to the wall display in the big conference room so she could glance at it while she watered the plants. It stayed logged in all night. I stood in the dark and read a month of Julian Hayes's real life off a screen he'd forgotten was a window. There it was, in the gray of a recurring hold. Not revitalization, not catalog investment partner, which was the phrase they'd been feeding the trades and the writer's room and, I assumed, Celeste. The event was titled, with the laziness of men who believe no one who matters will ever see it, MSC, close. And under it, in the notes field the assistant used for call-in details, a name and a number and 4 words that rearranged the floor under me. Meridian Sound Capital, Managing Partner, Owen Sterling. I stood very still. The name Sterling went through me the way a key change you didn't write goes through a song you thought you knew, the whole thing the same and suddenly, terribly, not. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. I had built my life on that. But some nights the building told you who someone was at 1:45 to midnight, in the reflected gray of a calendar, and all you could do was write it down and keep breathing. I kept breathing. I opened my notebook, the private one, the one nobody is allowed to read, and I did not write a song. I wrote a name and put a box around it. Then I went to work. Invisibility has a grammar. You learn what people leave behind them and where. Adriana Vargas shredded. Adriana was PR. She believed in evidence the way a cook believes in fire, as a thing that could burn you, so she destroyed hers. But she was also a woman who did 3 things at once and finished none, and the shredder bin under her desk was a compost heap of half-decisions. I knelt in the dark and read her the way you read a ruined tape, in fragments, filling the gaps with what the melody had to be. Cross-cut confetti, most of it, but she'd fed a stapled thing in sideways and it had jammed, and she'd yanked it and half of it survived. A talking points memo. Holding lines, it said at the top, and then bullet points for a story that hadn't happened yet. If asked, writer's room, natural evolution, streamlining creative, do not confirm headcount. If asked, session players, deflect to modern production efficiencies. And at the bottom, in a different hand, Julian's fat felt tip. Kill the sentimental stuff. Nobody cries for a demo singer. I have been called worse. I filed it, not in a drawer, in the place I keep the things that will be sung back to people someday, in the exact key they said them. Then the hard drives. I had legitimate access to the session folders. I was the demo singer. My rough vocals lived on that server in 1,000 nested folders nobody else could be bothered to navigate. But the finance share was a different country, and I had no business there, and I was in it inside 4 minutes because Julian's assistant used the studio's own address as the second half of every password, and the first half was the label's founding year, which was painted on the lobby wall in gold. Security is a story people tell themselves. I have made a career of being the person they never cast in it. The deal deck was there. Meridian Sound Capital, 41 slides, the kind of document that smiles at you. They did not use the word gut. Men like this never use the word for the thing they are doing. That is the whole art of them. They said, rationalize the writing function. They said, sunset the session artist cost center. They had a slide, an actual slide, with a soft blue gradient and a stock photo of headphones, titled Catalog as Yield. And under it, a plan to license the songs, my songs, into anything that paid. Ads, hold music, cheap compilations sold at gas station counters, evergreen sync in perpetuity. There was a chart that went up and to the right, and every dollar of that climb was a writer who would not be in the room next year, and a session violinist who would find out from a form letter. There was a line, buried in slide 30-something, in the smaller font they save for the truth. IP acquired clean, original creative talent non-retained, ongoing royalty exposure minimal per legacy agreements. Non-retained. 12 years ago, a different fund had used a different phrase for the same act, and it had been me they didn't retain. My name they filed under minimal exposure. My December sessions, they moved up and to the right on somebody's chart, while I lost my voice on the record, my partner, my whole name. I knew this deck. I had lived inside its earlier draft. The letterhead had changed. The playbook had not. And on slide 1, under the smiling logo, the partners. Meridian Sound Capital. Founded by Arthur Sterling. Managing partner, Owen Sterling. Founded by Arthur Sterling. I want to tell you I was surprised. I had spent 10 years grading the world, and I was surprised by almost nothing anymore. That was the cost of the ledger. But I sat down on the floor of the finance office in the dark, with the deck glowing on the monitor above me, and I let myself be surprised for exactly one song's length. Call it 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Because the shape of it was so clean, it was almost beautiful, in the way that a trap is beautiful when you are finally standing far enough above it to see the whole thing. Arthur Sterling's money had bankrolled the men who took the December sessions. Arthur Sterling's money had paid for the word unstable to travel faster than the truth. Arthur Sterling was gone now. I'd read the obituary years ago. 3 columns. Visionary. Built an empire on undervalued assets, which is a very expensive way to say he found things people made and bought them cheap and erased the makers. And his son had inherited the empire and the appetite and the word undervalued. And he had come 12 years later to run the same play at 10 times the scale. Not one girl's debut this time, but a whole catalog, a whole room, a whole generation of invisible hands. The father took my songs. The son had come for everyone else's. Grade withheld. I did not have enough of Owen Sterling yet to grade him, but I made a space in the ledger with his name at the top, and I left the pen resting in it, the way you leave a mic stand set to the height of a singer you know is coming. I found Julian's kickback the next night, and it was, in the end, small and stupid, the way these things always are once you have them in your hand. He hadn't been clumsy with the deal, he'd been clumsy with the reward. There was a consulting agreement in the finance share, advisory services, transition period, routing a fee to an LLC whose only officer, when I pulled the state registry on my phone in the dark, was Julian Hayes' brother-in-law, a man whose entire professional history was a marina and a failed juice bar. Meridian was paying Julian to sell us cheap, and paying him sideways so the label's own board wouldn't see it land in his lap. He was going to gut the room that made him and take a finder's fee for the demolition, and route it through a man who could not find a session in a studio with a map. I photographed it the way I photograph everything now. Steady, no flash, the phone braced against the monitor's own frame so the picture had the screen's timestamp in it. I had learned, 12 years ago, the exact difference between knowing a thing and being able to prove it in a room full of people paid to disbelieve you. I would never again know something I could not play back. Julian Hayes. I moved his grade from fail to a lower failure, if there is such a thing, the failure of a man who would sell the only place that ever felt like home and call it strategy. Fail. Verse and chorus. Fail. Adriana. I understood better than I wanted to. In the shredder, I'd found a printout of her own contract, the renewal, and someone, Julian, the felt tip again, had written post-close next to her title. She wasn't a believer. She was a woman who had done the math and decided the winning side was the one with the coats. That is a kind of complicity you can almost forgive, right up until you watch it aimed at a 23-year-old. I did not move her grade. I left it where it was, and I left a little room under it, because 10 years had taught me that the weak links flinch first, and I was going to need someone to flinch. And Celeste. Celeste Thorne's collapse was the loudest silence in the building, and it was in the finance share too, if you knew that a star is a balance sheet in a good dress. The last 2 records had underperformed, soft, the deck said, declining relevance, a phrase I circled with my eye and did not photograph because it would have felt like gloating, and I had rules about that. She was leveraged against future earnings that were not coming. She owed the machine, and the machine had found a way to turn her name and her catalog into cash before the number in the corner went red for good. She thought the sale was her rescue. She did not understand that in a deck like Meridian's, the star is not a partner. The star is inventory. IP acquired clean. Her name was on my songs, and her name was about to be worth exactly the pennies per stream that a private equity fund could squeeze out of a hold music license, and she was going to sign it away smiling because Julian had told her a story about revitalization, and Adriana had a holding line, and none of them had ever once imagined that the demo girl closing the studio behind them had, over 10 patient years, quietly become the one person in the building who actually held the deed. A song is nothing until the right voice sings it, Celeste liked to say, to journalists warmly, as if she'd bled for it. She was about to find out what a song is worth when the wrong men own it, and the right voice has stopped singing. I met Owen Sterling on a Thursday in the daylight, which is where they always want to meet you, because daylight is theirs, and they know it. He came for a walkthrough. Adriana had had the floor scrubbed and the good coffee brought out, and the writers told to look energized, which is a thing you can only say to people you have already decided to fire. I was in my corner with my headphones down around my neck, running a comp, which is to say I was doing the most useful and least visible thing a person can do in a music studio, which is finish something. He came in like weather, tall, unhurried, a suit the color of expensive rain. Younger than I'd built him in the dark, he had his father's empire but not yet his father's face, which meant the softness hadn't set into anything you could name yet. He shook Julian's hand and let Julian do the thing where he laughs too early. He nodded at Adriana. He looked at the writers the way you look at furniture in a house you're about to buy and renovate, not unkindly, which was worse. Unkindness at least sees you. Then it was raining outside, one of those fast, gray afternoons, and he was warm from the walk up, and he shrugged out of his coat as he crossed the room toward the console, and without breaking his sentence, without turning his head, without registering that a person and not a coat rack stood at the edge of his path, he held the coat out to the side. He held it out to me. He did not look at me. That is the part I want you to sit with, because I sat with it. He did not decide I was beneath him. Deciding requires seeing. He simply extended his arm into the space where the world keeps its help, confident the space would be filled. The way you set down a glass on a table you have never checked is there, because tables are always there. The coat hung in the air between his hand and my hands for less than a second. I took it. I want to be honest about why. I could tell you it was strategy, that a ghost stays a ghost, that you do not tip your hand to the final boss over a raincoat. All true. But there was another thing, older, and I have promised in these pages not to lie to you about the old things. 12 years ago, I had stood in a room like this one and been made into nothing by men exactly like him. And part of me, the 12 years ago part, the part that still lived in the December of it, took the coat because that is what she had been trained to do. And standing there holding the warm weight of Owen Sterling's raincoat while he talked yield curves over my head, I felt her, that girl, and I did not despise her. I held the coat the way you hold a hand. Then I graded him. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. He had decided. And in deciding, he'd shown me everything. The whole architecture of the man, top to bottom, in the geometry of an outstretched arm. His father had erased one songwriter to build a catalog. The son would erase 100 without ever learning a single name, and he would not even feel it. Because to feel a thing, you have to first admit it is a thing and not a coat rack. And that admission was the one cost Owen Sterling had inherited the fortune to never pay. Fail. Not verse by verse, all at once, the whole song. The way you know a record is bad from the first bar, and the rest is just confirmation. He did speak to me in the end, once. The walkthrough wound down. The coat came back to him. He was pleased in his flat way with the asset. And on his way out, he stopped near my corner, not for me, for the window behind me, the good view of the city they'd sell along with everything else. And he looked finally, not at me, but at the console, at the red record light, at the general fact of a working studio. And he said, to the room, to the air, to whatever help was standing in it. Sentiment's the enemy of a clean deal. There's always someone in a place like this who thinks the songs belong to them. A small smile, for the window, not for me. They never do. Anyone who tells you different is a problem you solve before the close. Then he was gone, and Julian was laughing too early again in the hall, and Adriana was saying something about a car, and I stood in my corner holding nothing, having held everything, and I thought, you have no idea, Owen Sterling, how many someones in a place like this think the songs belong to them. You have no idea that one of them owns the room you just walked out of. You have no idea that she was standing close enough to take your coat. There's always someone. He was right about that, he just had the tense wrong. There was always going to be someone. It was going to be me. I stayed late that night, which is to say, I stayed as myself. I ran the comp to the end. Leo had left the session up, and buried in the backing vocals of the track, Celeste would ride onto the golden score stage, the one she'd thank everyone but the writer for. There it was, the way it was in all of them. 3 notes, low, under the chorus, where no one listens and everyone hears. A woman's voice singing one true word so soft you'd take it for reverb. My signature. Registered, time-stamped, filed under a name none of them had ever bothered to learn belonged to the girl closing up behind them. Jade Autumn. In the metadata, in the melody, in the place no stage light reaches. Proof, waiting, patient, as I'd learned to be. I locked up, killed the lights when the ghosts were done, as instructed. Set the alarm with the nicer voice. But I did not go home right away, because I had heard the last thing before the door, the thing they said in the hall, thinking the building was empty, thinking the only one left was the one who didn't count. Julian and Adriana, low, quick, the way people talk about a thing they've already decided and only need to agree to feel clean about. The intern, Kira. She'd been asking questions. Where were the numbers? Why were the session calls being cut? Why did streamlining have a spreadsheet with names on it? She'd been talking to the writers, gathering them, the way a real one does, the way I hadn't dared to 12 years ago and had regretted every year since. And worse, from where they stood, she'd been seen at lunch with a music journalist. A sympathetic one, the kind who asks the question you spent a fortune making sure no one asks. She's a problem, Adriana said. Not cruel, tired. The tired of a woman doing math. So we solve her before the close, Julian said, and I heard, under his voice, the flat blue gradient of that slide, and Owen Sterling's arm held out into the space where the world keeps its help. They thought Kira Shaw was a problem to remove. I stood in the dark I owned, holding the keys they'd handed me, and I thought about the girl I'd been, and the girl she was, and the 12 years between them, and I made the last entry of the night. Not a grade, a prediction. They had decided the future was a problem. I had decided the future was Kira. One of us was about to be proven right. Chapter 5. The Frame. They came for Kira Shaw on a Tuesday, the way clean people always do their dirty work, in daylight, with coffee in their hands, calling it a process. I was in the far booth when it started, ostensibly retracking a scratch vocal for a bridge nobody would keep. That is the thing about being furniture with a nice voice. You are always in the room, and they forget the microphone in front of you is not the only thing that records. You learn to read a plan the way I read a lead sheet, by the shape of the silence around the notes. Julian Hayes came in first, which told me everything. Julian did not walk floors. The label president had an office with a view of the river and people who walked floors for him. When he appeared in the writer's wing at 9 in the morning, smelling of cedar and rehearsed warmth, it was because he had come to watch something end and wanted the pleasure of being present without the risk of a fingerprint. Adriana Vargas trailed him with a tablet held against her chest like a hymnal. Celeste's enforcer, the woman who called me the demo situation to a caterer once, 3 feet from my face, because to her my face was part of the wall. Studio C, Julian said low, and Adriana peeled off toward the small suite where the interns worked. I set my headphones down without a sound and followed the way I follow everything, as no one, going nowhere, carrying an empty coffee cup as a passport. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. I had decided a long time ago to be no one on purpose. It is the only disguise that never slips. Here is how you frame a 24-year-old songwriter for a crime she would never commit. If you are Julian Hayes, and you have done this before, you do not accuse her. Accusation invites defense. You build a room she is already standing in, and then point at the walls. I stood in the corridor outside Studio C, invisible in the gap between a rolling rack of cables and a water cooler, and watched Adriana set the tablet on the desk beside Kira's open laptop. Kira wasn't there yet. She came in at 9:30, always 9:30, because she took the early train and stopped to bring Silas a tea he never asked for and always drank. Adriana had 11 minutes. She used them well. She plugged a small drive into Kira's machine. Kira's, not a shared terminal, that was the whole point, and I watched the progress bar crawl in the reflection of the darkened control glass. She was not stealing anything. She was leaving something. A folder time-stamped last night at 2:14 a.m. Files named rough_mix and do_not_distrib, and an outbound email draft to a music blog account, saved but never sent, dated the same night. 2 of Celeste's tracks, 1 still embargoed for the show. The story wrote itself. The ambitious little intern, resentful and overlooked, had leaked the crown jewels to the press. It was almost good, the work of people who had learned that the truth is just a story with better metadata, and metadata is easy to write. The flaw was that I knew what real 2:14 a.m. looks like, and at 2:14 a.m. last night, Kira Shaw had not been in this building leaking anything. She'd been in Studio A with me and Silas and Leo, tracking harmonies for a demo that would never have her name on it, giving up her sleep for a song she'd never be credited on, because she actually still believed, that if the work was true enough, the truth would find its way to the surface. Pass. God, what a pass. The kind that breaks your heart in the ledger. Adriana pulled the drive. She wiped it on the hem of her blazer, a small, unconscious thing, the body knowing what the mouth would deny. Then she stepped out, and Julian was there, and I heard him say the sentence that would hang him later, easily, like a man ordering lunch. Make sure it's clean. When we pull her drive for the audit, everything's got to be hers, timestamps and all. I don't want a story, I want a resignation. A pause. She's the one rallying the room. Cut the head. The writers go quiet before the signing. Sterling wants it quiet. Sterling wants it quiet. Owen Sterling, managing partner of Meridian Sound Capital, whose father funded the men who buried me 12 years ago. The same playbook, generation to generation. Find the person who can name what's happening and make sure no one will ever believe her again. I had heard this song before. I knew every word. They had sung it over me once, in a different studio, with different suits, and I had walked out into the cold with my name taken off my own work and a whisper following me. Difficult, unstable, a credit thief that made sure no door in the industry opened again. Standing in that corridor, I did not feel rage. Rage is loud, and loud is a luxury for people who can afford to be seen. What I felt was older and quieter and much more patient, the click of a lock finding its tumblers. Because here is what Julian Hayes did not know. I was not furniture. I was the one who locked this building at night. I had a key to every drive because I mixed on every drive. And under a name none of them had ever heard spoken aloud, Jade Autumn, registered with the Rights Society, the anonymous author of every hit that built their careers, I quietly held a controlling interest in the catalog they were about to sell, through a holding company called Northlight, which meant the session logs were mine. The access records were mine. The security footage that watched every corridor in this building ran through a system my holding company had a contractual right to audit. They were writing Kira's guilt into the metadata, and I owned the metadata. Do not expose it, not yet. This was the discipline 10 years teaches you that no one else in the room had learned. A frame is only a weapon while it's in your hands. The instant I revealed I could disprove it, they'd simply build a better one. And this time they'd know to check the corners. No. Let them commit. Let them put it in writing, in email, in signed audit requests, in the timestamps they were so proud of. Let the noose be tied by the hands that meant it for someone else. Every knot a signature. I would not cut the rope. I would guide it. I went back to my booth and hummed a scratch melody into my phone, 3 notes and then the 4th that bends where you don't expect it. My signature. The one I hide in everything true I've ever written. A fingerprint no one thinks to look for because who checks a demo singer's humming? Then I saved something else. A copy of the real session log from the night before. The one that showed Kira's badge nowhere near Studio C at 2:14 a.m., pulled quietly through the back of a system I was never supposed to be able to see, and had always been able to see. Evidence is a chord. You don't play it until the room is ready to hear it. Kira came in at 9:30. She brought Silas his tea and set it down at his station and said something that made the old man's face soften at the edges, the way a face does around someone who reminds it that the work was ever supposed to mean something. She had no idea. She walked to Studio C and sat down at a laptop that had been turned into a confession while she slept. By 11, the audit was routine. By 1, concerning. By 3, Adriana had walked her to the small conference room with the frosted glass, and Julian was already inside, radiating regret like a man who'd rehearsed it in the car. I could not hear the words through the frosted glass. I didn't need to. I have watched this scene from the outside before, and from the inside of it. The tablet slid across the table. The face that goes from confusion to disbelief to something worse. The specific horror of an honest person realizing that honesty is not, and never was, a defense. Kira's hands came up, open, the universal shape of, I would never. And Julian's mouth made the shape of, we're not saying you did, we're saying it looks like. And we have to protect the show, and the kindest thing for everyone. The kindest thing. They always find the word kind when they're being anything but. Kira came out 12 minutes later without her badge. Adriana had it. Kira's face was dry, which was somehow worse than tears. She had gone somewhere very far inside herself, to the room where you keep the things you can't afford to feel yet. She walked past me. She looked right at me, at the demo girl by the cable rack, and for 1 second something passed between us, and I almost broke 10 years of silence to tell her, they did this to me too. I know exactly what this is. Hold on, I have you. I didn't. I gave her the only thing that wouldn't burn the whole trap down. I said it quietly, so only she could hear. Don't sign anything they put in front of you. Not one page. Make them do it without your name on it. She blinked. It was not what she expected from the furniture. She held on to it, I saw her hold on to it, and nodded once and walked out into a daylight that had just decided she was no one. Pass, Kira Shaw. Pass, and hold on. Leo found me at the shredder at midnight. I was on my knees in front of it, in the low blue hum of the after-hours studio, doing the ugly patient work, because they'd shredded the originals, the real session sheets that would have shown Kira's honest timeline. But a cross-cut shredder makes confetti, and confetti can be sorted, and I had time and 10 years of refusing to let true things stay buried. I'd already found the corners of 3 pages. I'd photographed the drive folder before they wiped their tracks. I had the footage request logged. The rope was almost fully in my hands. Ilara! Leo's voice was strange. I looked up. He was holding something, not a page from the shredder, a tape. An old cassette, the plastic gone amber with age. He'd been cleaning out the deep archive, the racks in the back where dead formats go, and he was holding it the way you hold something that has started to burn your fingers. On the spine, in handwriting I would know in any dark, was a label. N. Keane. December Sessions. Demo 1. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The shredder hummed. I pulled it to wipe it, Leo said slowly. Old client tapes. And I put it in the deck, just to log what was on it before I... He stopped. His hand was not quite steady. Ilara, there's a voice on this tape, and there's a melody. 3 notes, and then the 4th that bends where you don't expect it. He hummed it. My signature. The one I'd hummed into my phone that afternoon. The one buried in every hit that built this building. It's the same, Leo said. Exactly the same. The voice is younger and the recording's garbage, but it's... He looked at me, and I watched 12 years rearrange themselves behind his eyes. The glasses I wore now, and the different last name and the way I'd made myself smaller, falling away one by one. It's you. You're E. Vance. You wrote the December Sessions. You've been... Sit down, Leo, I said gently. He sat down on the crate, still holding the tape, hands shaking now, and I understood that of all the ways to be recognized, this was the one I'd feared most. Because Leo was the one person left who'd known me before, who'd sung backup on that doomed demo and been told the singer was trouble and best forgotten. They said you left the business, he whispered. They said you were... The word they used. Difficult, I said. Unstable, a credit thief. I know the words. I helped them stop being able to hurt me with them. I took the tape from his hands gently, the only surviving copy of my own voice, singing my own songs before Celeste Thorne put her name on them and burned mine down. I didn't leave, Leo. I went underground. I registered under a pen name. I'm the one who's been writing the whole time. Every song they gave to Celeste. I wrote them. And I've been quietly buying back the rooftop they built on my grave. Jade Autumn, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd read the metadata on 10 years of sessions and never had a reason to know the December in it was mine. He was quiet a long time. Then he did the thing that made him my right hand from that midnight forward. He didn't cry, and didn't ask why I hadn't told him, and didn't make it about the shock in his own chest. He looked at the confetti across the floor, at Kira's shredded truth, and understood in one breath why I was on my knees in front of a shredder at midnight. "They framed the kid," he said, "and you can prove it." "I can prove all of it. The frame, the kickback, the buyer, the whole generational machine running the same con it ran on me, run by the son of the man who funded it the first time." I set the tape on the crate beside him. "But not tonight. If I move tonight, they build a cleaner frame tomorrow and I lose Kira for real. I let them finish tying it. I let them put every knot in writing. And then, at exactly the right moment, in front of exactly the right people, I hand them the rope." Leo looked at me for a long, level moment. "Okay," he said. "Then I'm at the board. Whatever you need moved in the dark, I move it. You've been alone in this booth for 10 years. He picked the tape back up, reverent. "Not anymore. Pass. Leo Asante. The oldest, truest pass in the ledger." Silas Croft found me at 3. Of course it was 3. It's always 3. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. And Silas was who he'd always been. The veteran engineer who couldn't sleep when the room felt wrong. Who'd come back because a young writer he cared about had walked out into daylight a suspect, and something in the old machine of his conscience wouldn't stop grinding. He didn't see the confetti. I'd cleared it. He saw me at the big board in the dark and brought 2 paper cups of the terrible hallway coffee and set one beside me and lowered himself into the chair the way men do when their knees have engineered 40 years of other people's dreams. "You knew her," he said. "Not a question. The intern. You told her not to sign." "I told her not to sign." He turned the cup in his hands. In the low light of the meters, he looked every one of his years, the way people do when they've decided to say a true thing out loud for the first time in a long time. "I have to tell you something," Silas said, "and I don't know why it's you, except you're the only one in this building who feels like she'd understand it, and I'm too old to keep carrying it up the stairs." He breathed. "Years ago, there was a young writer, girl about that intern's age, extraordinary. The kind of thing you hear maybe twice in a career, where the songs are just true. Nothing wasted, every line load-bearing." He was looking at the meters, at the little needles resting at 0. "And I watched them take the songs. Watched them put another name on the record and walk her out the door with a whisper on her back so nobody'd ever hire her again. I engineered that girl's demo. I knew what those songs were. I knew whose they were." The tape was in my bag, 3 feet from his knee. My own voice, at 24, on a cassette he'd rolled. I did not move. "And I said nothing," Silas said. "I had a mortgage and a reputation and a place in the rooms, and I told myself it wasn't my fight. And I've listened to that girl's stolen songs on the radio for 12 years. He finally looked at me. "So when they walked that kid out today, His voice caught, an old cable finally fraying. "I couldn't do it twice. I'm not going to stand at the board and watch it happen twice." I sat very still in the dark. This is the part of the ledger they don't warn you about. The pass that costs you your composure to give. 12 years I'd carried this alone, believing every single person in every room had watched me burn and chosen the fire's side. And here was Silas Croft, who had watched and never stopped carrying it, whose guilt had aged in him until it was strong enough to finally move his hands. He didn't know. He was confessing his silence over my grave to the woman in the grave, and it was the single most human thing anyone had said to me in a decade. "That girl," I said carefully, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect. "Whatever happened to her?" "I don't know," Silas said. "Nobody does. Some say she gave up. I don't believe it. Somebody who wrote like that doesn't give up. She's somewhere, writing." He almost smiled. "I hope to God she's somewhere writing." I looked at the man who'd rolled tape on the best year of my life and then let the world set it on fire, and who was now 3 feet from the last surviving copy of it, telling me he hoped I was somewhere writing. "I am, Silas. I'm right here. I never stopped." "You remind me of her, actually," he said quietly into the dark. "I don't know what it is. The way you listen. The way you hold a room like you're the only one who can hear the note under the note." He shook his head at himself. "Foolish old man. She'd be your age now, come to think of it." That's not foolish, I said. We sat with the coffee going cold, and I did not tell him. Not because I couldn't, because he had just handed me something too rare to spend early. A witness. The engineer who knew the December sessions were mine, who'd rolled the original tape, who could stand up in a room full of press and say, I engineered that demo. Those were her songs. I watched them take them. Without knowing it, he had just volunteered to be the second most devastating proof I owned. Pass, Silas Croft. Pass. And I'm sorry, and thank you, and hold on. You'll know soon. He put his hand on the board when he stood to leave. Flat, tender, the way you touch a thing that's outlived its usefulness to everyone but you. There was a scar across the back of his knuckles from a soldering iron 40 years gone, and I have one to match on my own hand, small and white across the meat of the thumb, from the same brand of iron in the same kind of room, and neither of us noticed we were matched. Two people burned by the same trade, telling the truth in the dark, only one of us knowing it was a reunion. I stayed at the board after he left. I laid it all out the way you'd lay out stems on a mix, every element I now held, faders up, and listened to the whole song of it at once. The shredded originals, reconstructed. The planted drive, photographed before the wipe. The session log proving Kira was in Studio A, not Studio C, at 2:14 a.m. The footage request running now in a server room 3 floors down. Julian's voice, cut the head, I want a resignation, Sterling wants it quiet. The kickback paper, the Meridian deal. The line I could draw, clean as a melody, from Arthur Sterling's fund 12 years ago to his son's fund tonight. The same con at scale. The erased author swapped out for a room full of erased authors. And under all of it, like a bass line you feel more than hear. The tape. E. Vance, December Sessions, Demo 1. My voice, before they took it. The signature I'd hidden in every song since, waiting in the metadata of a decade of number ones for the night I'd finally play it out loud. They thought they were removing an obstacle, that cutting Kira would let them carry the room off quietly in the dark, sell it, gut it, license the songs into cheap forever. They had tied a noose to fire an intern, and I had spent 10 years learning to let people finish knots. The signing was set for dawn, the catalog sale to Meridian, fast-tracked, papered, ready. The Golden Score ceremony was the same day, hours later, live, packed with the press they'd invited themselves, the sealed author of record already lodged in the Rights Society registry under a name they'd built empires around and never once said aloud. 2 events, 1 deadline. All of it converging on the same thin, gray hour I'd spent a decade living inside. I hummed the 4 notes one more time into the dark, soft so only the room could hear, and let myself feel, just for a moment, just at the board, just at 3 in the morning when the red light was off and only the song was left, the thing I never let myself feel. Not rage, readiness. They were going to sell the room out from under us at dawn. Dawn was the deadline I had spent 10 years refusing to meet. Chapter 6, 3 in the morning. The call came at 2:41 in the morning, and I knew before I answered that something in the building had already broken. It was Leo, her voice flat and careful, the tone she used when she was afraid and refusing to show it. The master's gone, she said. The performance master. The song for the show. It's corrupted, Alara. All the session files. Silas is losing his mind. I was already dressed. I was always half-dressed for this, the way some people sleep in their clothes near a hospital. I laced my boots in the dark and let her keep talking because every word was a piece of the shape of what had been done. They ran an overnight archive migration, she said. Julian's office signed off at 11. By the time anybody noticed, the master project was flagged red error. The stems won't mount, and the call sheet for tomorrow's rehearsal got voided in the same batch. Voided, Ilara. 40 musicians told not to come. Accidentally, I said. That's the word on the ticket. Accidental data event during routine maintenance. 12 years I had spent learning the difference between an accident and a decision wearing an accident's coat. This was a decision. You do not accidentally void a call sheet and corrupt a master and lock the writers out of the room in the same 8-hour window your buyer wants the catalog signed clean before sunrise. You do that on purpose, at night, when the people who love the work are asleep and the people who own it are not. I'm coming in, I said. "You're the demo girl," Leo said softly. It was not an insult from her, it was a warning. "You're not even supposed to have a key anymore. Adriana changed the after-hours list Tuesday." "I know," I said. "I had a key anyway. I had a key to everything. They just didn't know whose hand it was in." 2:59 a.m. The studio at 3 in the morning is a cathedral nobody built for God. The live rooms go dead quiet, the foam drinking every footstep, the racks breathing their small red and green stars, the tube amps holding warmth long after the last take like a body that has just stopped singing. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. I had built a life on that sentence. Tonight, the building was going to teach it to some people who had never learned it. Silas was at the main console, aged 5 years since the afternoon, glasses pushed up into his gray hair, leaning on his fists over the desk and staring at an error dialogue the color of a bruise. Around him, the machine spat its polite little sentences. "Master project, read error, stem volume not found, archive integrity, failed." "They killed it," he said, not looking up. He knew my step. Sound men know footsteps, the weight of you before the doors open. 26 months I've kept redundant mounts on this room, and they routed around every one of them. You'd have to know exactly where my safeties were to miss all of them this clean. He raised his head and his eyes found me, and I watched him decide, the way he always did, that I was safe to be honest in front of. Somebody who knew this room did this. Somebody who knew it and hated it. Or was paid not to love it, I said. He gave a short, wrecked laugh. That's the whole business in one sentence. Leo was at the second station, hands flying, and I could see from the door that none of it would work because the damage wasn't damage. It was a lock. They hadn't destroyed the song. You don't destroy an asset you're about to sell. They had sealed it, frozen the master behind a rights and access flag routed through the label's legal server, so anyone who reached for it hit a wall. File under administrative hold pending the sale. The song was fine. The song was perfect. It was simply, as of 11 o'clock, no longer ours to touch. I understood then what the rehearsal cancellation really was. No rehearsal meant no session players in the building, and when the buyers came at dawn, they would sign over a catalog and a studio that looked, on paper, already empty. No room, no writers. No inconvenient 40 musicians in a hallway to remind anyone that songs come out of people. Just files and signatures and a clean transfer of a decade of somebody else's soul. They were staging the room to look already dead, so the sale would feel like a mercy. It was, I had to admit, elegant. Buy the talent cheap, erase the maker, own the catalog, make the erasure look like tidying up. Owen Sterling had learned at the knee of the same lesson that ended my life at 24. The same playbook his father Arthur ran 12 years ago, unchanged. Only the scale had. Fail, I thought, and it was not a small grade, and it was not a private one anymore. 3:14 a.m. The service door in the loading bay opened and shut, quiet as a held breath, and a minute later Kira Shaw came into the console room with her hood up and her hands shaking. She had been fired 6 hours ago, walked out at 9 with a security escort and a cardboard box, and a manufactured story about a leaked track everyone in the building knew she'd never touched. And I had watched from the shadow of a doorway and done nothing, because doing nothing was the hardest and most necessary thing I had done in years. I was keeping every card face down until the table was fully set, because you do not spend a decade building a trap and then spring it early to feel briefly good. But God, it cost me to watch that girl carry a box to her car. And here she was, sneaking back into the building that had thrown her out because the song was in trouble and she couldn't stand not to help. "I still had my badge for the parking structure," she said, breathless, to the room. Not quite to me because I was furniture and she was polite to furniture. "It hasn't been cut yet. Leo texted me. Is it really the whole master?" "Sit down, kid," Silas said gently. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should the sale," Kira said. "But it's happening anyway, so—" And there it was. The grade. The whole of her in one sentence. A fired 23-year-old with every reason to go home and let the people who'd wronged her drown, driving back across the city at 3 in the morning to save a song that would never carry her name either. For the room. For the players who'd be locked out. For the work. "Pass," I wrote in the ledger I kept behind my eyes. Pass. Verse and chorus and bridge, the cleanest grade I'd given in a decade. She was me before they broke me, refusing to break. And if I did nothing else with what I had built, I would make sure the machine that ate the December sessions did not get to eat her too. She reminded me of someone, Silas had told me once, not knowing he was telling it to that someone's face. I stood at Leo's shoulder and looked at the wall of red error text, and I made my decision. What I did next was the first time in 10 years I reached out from the shadow and moved a machine, and I have thought about the weight of it since. I did not tell them who I was. I did not say, "Step aside, this is mine." I went out into the hall, into the dark by the vending machines where the light was the color of old ice, and I took out the phone no one here had a number for, the one registered to a woman who does not, on paper, exist as me. And I did the quietest, most violent thing I know how to do. I made a call as Jade Autumn. Because here was what none of them knew. Not Julian, not Adriana, not Owen Sterling with his beautiful coat. The master they had just sealed was not the labels to seal. The song, the show's centerpiece, the one Celeste would stand in a column of light and pretend to have bled for, was registered with the Rights Society under the name Jade Autumn, whose publishing was administered by Northlight Publishing, a holding company with a controlling interest in the very catalog they were trying to sell out from under all of us before breakfast. The label could put an administrative hold on a master. It could not hold that master against the registered publisher of record without consent. And it had never gotten consent, because it had never known it needed it. For 10 years they'd been so certain that Jade Autumn was some reclusive genius in a foreign city that they never once looked at the place a genius could hide best. The last row, the vocal booth, the worn hoodie, holding their coats. I called the after-hours line at Northlight's Rights Administration, a service I paid for, staffed by people who had never seen my face and knew me only as a signature, a voice on a recording, and a set of instructions never to be questioned, and I gave the countermand. "This is Jade Autumn," I said, and my own pen name in my own mouth in a dark hallway raised the hair on my arms, because I so rarely said it aloud. There is an unauthorized administrative hold on registered work, the December filings, the current performance master, placed without publisher consent. I am instructing Northlight to issue an immediate release and assert. Publisher retains exclusive control of the master. No transfer of any December registered asset closes without publisher sign-off. Put it in writing to the label's legal server tonight, time-stamped. Copy the Rights Society, before dawn. A pause. The sound of someone typing who had learned long ago not to ask Jade Autumn why. "It'll be on their server within the hour," the voice said. "They'll fight it, but the hold releases the moment we assert. They can't sell what they don't fully own, and they can't lock a publisher out of their own registration. Anything else, Gray? Just make it quiet. Make it look like the system did it, an administrative correction." "Accidental," the voice said dry. "Accidental," I agreed. I hung up and stood in the ice-colored light and let myself breathe. It was the first time in 10 years I had reached into the machine that erased me and turned a gear on purpose, in real time, to save something that mattered, and no one would ever know it was me. The hand in the dark, the signature nobody could read. Under the cold, clean joy of it, I heard my grandmother at a church piano say a song is a true thing you leave behind, and I thought, yes, Eleanor, and so is a debt. I am about to leave one of those behind too. 3:52 a.m. The master came back, and I timed it so I was standing in the console room, harmless, invisible, when it happened. Silas had given up, forearms on his knees, staring at the floor. Leo had her head in her hands. Kira was quietly crying and pretending she wasn't, and the error dialogue glowed its bruised purple over all of them. And then the screen blinked. Archive integrity restored. Master project mounted. Stem volume available. Silas's head came up like a man surfacing. He was at the console before he'd finished standing, and the waveform of the master bloomed across the monitor in that gold-green line that always looked to me like a horizon, and the room filled with the first bar of the song. My song. The three-note motif I hide in everything true I write. The descending figure that is my fingerprint pressed into the wet clay of every hit this industry ever danced to. And under it, buried in the backing vocals so low you'd take it for reverb, one word sung once. The word I put in every real thing I make, so the truth is always singing, even when no one can hear it. It's back, Silas breathed. How is it back? The hold's gone. He looked at the message log scrolling up the side of the screen. Publisher assertion. Administrative correction. Time-stamped. Copied to the Rights Society. Somebody at the publishing company killed the hold. He shook his head slowly. That old engineer's wonder at a machine doing the right thing for once. I didn't even know we had a publisher who'd fight for us. I thought Northlight was just a name on a royalty statement. Maybe somebody's watching, I said. Leo looked at me. Just for a second. And something moved behind her face, because Leo had recognized me weeks ago, had heard the three-note motif in an old hit, and gone gray and grabbed my scarred hand across a mixing desk and whispered a name I hadn't heard aloud in years. And she knew exactly who had just reached into the machine, and she said nothing, because she was my right hand now, and my right hand knew how to hold a secret like a note held at the end of a bar until the exact moment it's meant to resolve. Maybe somebody is, Leo said. Kira wiped her face with the heel of her hand and laughed, wet and disbelieving. So we can rehearse. Somebody has to unvoid the call sheet. Already fighting it, Silas said, grim and glad at once, back in the work. If the master's ours again, the room's got a leg to stand on. I'll wake up the union rep. I'll wake up God if I have to. 40 musicians got told not to come to work. That's a fight I know how to have. And the room came alive. That particular electric alive of artisans handed back the thing they thought they'd lost, redeciding at 4 in the morning that they are not furniture, that the work is theirs, that they will not go quietly. Silas on the phone with the union. Leo rebuilding the session tree. Kira, fired, unpaid, unnamed Kira, pulling a chair up to a monitor she had no legal right to touch and checking the stems one by one because somebody had to, because that was who she was. I stood at the back where the light didn't reach and watched the people I loved fight for a song they didn't know was mine, saved by a hand they didn't know was mine, and I let myself have exactly 10 seconds of it. Then I put it away, because I had a trap to finish setting, and it was almost dawn. Here is what I had. In the flat black folder I keep in a lockbox no one at that studio would ever imagine the demo girl could afford. I had Julian Hayes' kickback, The Wire, the Shell Consultancy, the advisory fee from Meridian Sound Capital paid into an account that had no business existing, the emails where he priced his own conscience and found it cheap. Fail. I had the forged scandal against Kira, the shredded originals from the bin, the deleted metadata proving her melody was hers and predated the leak by 4 months, the footage of the drive being loaded with planted files by a hand that was not hers. Enough to unruin a good young writer at the exact moment it would do the most damage to the people who'd ruined her. I had the Meridian deal, the real one under the revitalization cover story. Gut the writer's room, fire the session artists, license a decade of stolen soul into ads and cheap compilations forever. Owen Sterling's signature ready for a dawn no one thought I could stop. I had the paper trail, the one that made my hands cold to hold. 12 years back, in the sediment of an old fund's filings, in a financing memo that should have been shredded and wasn't because the arrogant never think anyone will read the receipts. The line connecting Arthur Sterling's money to the launch of Celeste Thorne, and 3 pages later the retainer paid to a reputation management outfit. In the same quarter my name went on an industry blacklist as a credit thief. The theft of the December sessions and the burial of the woman who wrote them, itemized, invoiced, filed. Celeste and the Crests, father then son, hand to hand across 12 years, and my whole ruined life sitting in a subtotal. And I had the proof of authorship, the old demo tape, E. Vance, in a hand I could still barely look at. And the metadata, the Rights Society registration under Jade Autumn, the buried backing vocal, the 3-note motif hidden in every hit for 10 years, a signature only I could have written, a truth singing under the polish in a voice no stage light ever reaches. I held all of it, every card, the whole hand, and I made the decision I had come to that studio at 3 in the morning to make. I let the show go on. I could have blown it up that night, leaked the kickback to the music press, dumped the Meridian memo, cleared Kira's name in a single anonymous message, stopped the sale in a lawyer's office at dawn with no one ever seeing my face. Quiet, clean, Safe. The demo girl stays invisible, the villains lose in the dark, and nobody ever learns whose hand held the knife. I didn't want it quiet. For 10 years, I had been a shadow the way they made me a shadow, and I had learned to love the reach of it. But a shadow is a thing that happens to you, and I was done being a thing that happened to me. They had built a stage. They had invited the press themselves. They had planned a night of lights and cameras and industry royalty in the front row to crown a woman who never wrote a line for a song I bled for, and then to sell the room out from under everyone in it. A public funeral for the work, and they meant to smile through it in good jewelry. So I would let them build the stage. I would let Celeste lift my song to her mouth, let Julian smile at the buyers, let the host ask the question the sealed nomination forces on live television, for the record, who actually wrote this? And let the screens light up with a name that was not Celeste Thorns. And then I would set down my headphones where furniture stands, walk out into the light they built, and introduce myself to a room that had decided for a decade that I was no one. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided. All of them. Now they were going to see. 5:20 a.m. I know they toasted because I poured the wine. They gathered in Julian's office as the sky went from black to the bruised gray I was named for. The deal all but done in their minds. The master they thought would stay buried, apparently, recovered by IT, a small annoyance, handled after the ink dried. Julian and Adriana, and, on the couch with his coat folded over the arm and his signature drying on a term sheet that would not survive the week, Owen Sterling, smooth, unhurried, a man who had inherited a playbook and never once imagined it could be read back to him. I was in the room because someone had to bring the tray. The caterers didn't come till 7. Adriana wanted the good glasses out for the buyers, and the demo girl was standing right there, useful as a coat rack. "You," she said, not looking at me, which is how she always looked at me. "Make yourself useful. Pour." So I poured. I moved among them in my worn hoodie, invisible, furniture with a nice voice, and filled their glasses while they talked as if I were not there, because that is the one thing the powerful will always do in front of the powerless. They will say anything, because a shadow can't hold a grudge and furniture can't take notes. "To a clean transfer," Julian said, lifting his glass. "To a clean room," Adriana said and laughed, and I hated her precisely for the wit of it. God, it'll be so much simpler once we've cleared out the dead weight in the writer's room, all that sentiment, all those people who think a song belongs to whoever cried the hardest making it. To finally clearing out the dead weight, Julian agreed, and they touched glasses, and Owen Sterling smiled his beautiful inherited smile and did not toast, because men like him do not need to. I stood a foot from his shoulder and topped off his wine, and he did not look at me. He never looked at me. He had handed me his coat once without a glance, and I was still to him the surface a coat lands on. Dead weight. The writer's room. Kira, who had driven back at 3 in the morning to save the song. Silas, who kept redundant safeties for a room nobody thanked him for. Leo. 40 musicians told not to come to work. Every invisible artisan whose hands make the thing the world sings at weddings and funerals without ever learning a single name. I filled the glass to exactly the line, no higher, steady as a note held at the end of a bar. My hand did not shake. 12 years ago, I was a girl who cried in a stairwell when they took my songs. That girl was gone, and what poured their wine that morning was the thing she became in the dark, patient and finished and without fear. If just once Owen Sterling had turned his head and read the face of the woman refilling his glass, he might have seen the grade written across me plain as a chorus. Fail, all of you. Verse by verse, I'll read it to you under the lights you paid for, in front of the press you invited, on the night you built to bury us. But they didn't look. They toasted the dead weight and drank, and the gray in the window went pale at the edges, and somewhere below us a master mounted clean, and a call sheet got unvoided, and a fired girl checked stems she'd never be paid for, and the trap sat finished and silent around all of us, like the hush right before a track drops, the held breath, the second of nothing, before the whole room shakes. I set the bottle down and gathered the empty glasses onto the tray. "Congratulations," I said, in the flat, pleasant voice of the help, and Adriana said, without hearing it. and I carried the tray out and down the hall and stood a moment in the ordinary morning light and let myself feel, all the way down, the thing I had decided. They scheduled the execution for the stage lights. They had no idea the executioner had been running their soundboard for 10 years. Chapter 7. Gray December. They gave me a folding chair in the wings, a black headset, and a clipboard nobody would ever read, and they called that a job. From where I stood, I could see the whole machine breathing. The golden score ceremony filled the hall to the rafters, the tiered seats, the long tables of buyers with their name cards, the invited press packed into a rail on the left with their little recording lights already blinking, the front row elite in clothes that cost more than a session player earned in a year. And behind all of it, up in the last rows where the air was thinner and the light barely reached, the session musicians and the backup singers and the writer's room sat in a tight, quiet cluster, dressed in their good shirts, watching the thing they had built be handed to people who had never made a single minute of it. I had spent 10 years learning to read a room from the outside of it. Tonight the room did not know it was being graded. 2 minutes to the performance slot, a stage manager said into my ear, to me, because I was the one holding the soundboard cues. That was the joke of it. They had put the show's audio in the hands of the demo girl. For 10 years, they had put everything that actually mattered in my hands, because hands are invisible, and only faces get remembered. I looked at my own hands. There was a small scar across the left one, from a broken guitar string 12 years ago, on a night I do not talk about. I flexed it. Then I keyed the cue. The lights dropped. The hush came, that specific hush right before a track drops. The one I love more than any sound in the world, the held breath of 1,000 people about to be moved by something and never once wondering who moved them. And Celeste Thorne walked out into the gold. She was magnificent, in the way a beautiful car is magnificent, engineered, waxed, aimed. The dress caught the light like water. She lifted the microphone to her mouth, and the track came up under her, and it was my track. It was mine down to the breath. The 3-note motif in the second bar was mine, the one I had buried in every real song I ever wrote, the little gray-blue turn that nobody was meant to notice. Under the chorus, deep in the backing vocals where the mix hides its secrets, there was a voice singing one word again and again, and the word was, remember. And that voice was mine, recorded at 3 in the morning in a booth with the red light on, layered so far down that Celeste had performed this song 40 times, and never once heard the woman standing under it. She sang. The crowd stood. The press lights blinked like a field of small red eyes. I stood in the wings with my clipboard, and I graded her, the way I had graded her 1,000 times. Fail. Not for the voice. The voice was fine. She was a lovely instrument and a coward of a person, and I had learned long ago that those two things live comfortably in the same body. I graded her fail for what she said when the last note faded and the applause broke over her like surf, because I had heard it in rehearsal, and I knew it was coming, and it still landed on me like a flat hand. Thank you, Celeste said, breathless, gleaming. Thank you. You know, people ask me how I do it, and I always say, a song is nothing until the right voice sings it. The room laughed and warmed and loved her. Behind me, in a corridor lined with cold coffee and rented flowers, a group of men in good suits were bending over a table, and on that table was a contract, and above that contract hung the last 10 years of my life. Let me tell you what was happening in that corridor while Celeste bowed. Backstage, in a private room with a security guard on the door, Julian Hayes, label president, charming as a razor, was pouring 3 glasses and pushing a stack of pages across a table toward Owen Sterling of Meridian Sound Capital. The catalog sale. Tonight was the cover. The awards were the distraction. The press all aimed at the stage while the actual transfer of a decade of songs happened 40 feet away in the dark. Under the terms on that table, the writing room would be consolidated. The session players would be released. Every hit I had ever written would be sold to a fund that would license it into commercials and cheap compilations forever, strip the names off the credits, and gut the people in the back rows before the room had cooled from the applause. They had a timestamp for it. They meant to sign it during the Song of the Year presentation, so that by the time the winner walked off, the room they had come from would already belong to someone else. Owen Sterling had handed me his coat on the way in. Didn't look at me. Just held it out sideways, the way you hand your coat to a rack, and I took it, because a demo girl takes the coat, and because I wanted to feel exactly how little he saw me one last time. His father, Arthur Sterling, had bankrolled the machine that erased me 12 years ago. Same playbook: buy the talent cheap, delete the author, own the catalog forever. Now the son had come to run it again, at scale, and he had handed me his coat. I hung it up carefully. I am always careful. That is the thing they never understood about me. The host came back to the podium, a genial, silver-haired man the industry trusted, which was precisely why they had chosen him and precisely why it was about to go wrong for them. The envelope for Song of the Year. He read the nominees. He opened it. Song of the Year, he said, goes to Celeste Thorne. The hall stood again. Of course it did. She floated up the steps in a wash of gold, and she took the golden statuette, and she thanked the label, and Julian Hayes, who was at that moment 3 feet from a pen in a back room, and her stylist, and her fans, and the light, and the journey, and herself. She thanked everyone in that building who had ever taken something from someone weaker and called it vision. She did not thank the writer. She never thought of the writer. To her, the writer was weather. Songs happen to her the way good luck happens to people who are born standing on other people's shoulders and think the height is theirs. She turned to go. And the host, bless him, he had 1 card left. The card the ceremony's own rules required. The card nobody in the machine had thought to fear, glanced down at his notes and lifted the microphone one more time. Before you go, Celeste. A little laugh. The room settled, indulgent. For the record, the Golden Score honors the author of the winning work, and our friends at the Right Society have flagged something charming for us. The Songwriter of the Year, the author of record for this song, and, I'm told, for a rather astonishing run of #1s across the last decade, is registered under a single name. He smiled at the room. Jade Autumn. The word landed and did nothing, because nobody in that hall had ever met Jade Autumn. Jade Autumn was a signature on paperwork, a ghost in the metadata, a pen name in a registry that most of the front row had never once opened. So, for the record, on the night we honor the songwriter, the host spread his hands, warm, showman to the end. Who actually wrote this song? Is Jade Autumn here tonight? Will Jade Autumn come forward? Silence. A confused, delighted, expectant silence. Celeste's smile flickered, the tiniest hairline crack, there and gone. She did not know who Jade Autumn was either. She had spent 10 years as the mouth of a name she had never met. The host looked out at the room, out over the buyers and the press and the elite, and, without ever meaning to, over the last rows where the invisible people sat. Anyone? He said gently. I set down my clipboard. I lifted the headset off, those good, heavy headphones I had worn 10,000 nights, the ones that felt like the only home I had ever kept, and I laid them over the back of the folding chair, careful, the way I am always careful. And I stepped out of the wings, out of the dark I had lived in for a decade, and I walked across the gold. It's a long walk, from the wings to the podium, when 1,000 people are trying to work out who you are and coming up with nobody. I felt every step of it. I felt Adriana Vargas, at the label table, half rise and hiss something. She'd have called it the demo situation if she'd had breath for words. I felt Celeste turn, holding her statuette, her face doing the thing a face does when the ground it stood on quietly turns to water. I reached the podium. The host, uncertain now, tilted the mic toward me out of pure reflex, the way you'd hand a stranger the phone when it's for them. I took it. Jade Autumn sent no representative, I said. The words went out over the room, clean and level, the coldest thing I have ever said and the truest. Jade Autumn is holding the microphone. Nothing. The kind of nothing that has a floor dropping out of it. My name is Alara Vance. I wrote every song that built this stage for 10 years. I let that sit. And I have been grading all of you. I want to tell you I felt triumph. I didn't, not yet. What I felt, standing in the light I had spent my life running the switches for, was the particular calm of a woman who has done her homework. I had 10 years of homework in my hands. Let me read you the report card, I said, verse by verse. I'll be quick. The lawyers can be slow later. At the press rail, the little red lights had all swung toward me. Every one. For the first time in 12 years, I was the thing being recorded. Julian Hayes. I found him at his table, half standing, the color leaving him like a tide going out. Label president. You told a music journalist last spring that the writer's room was dead weight, and then you told the room it was family. 3 weeks ago, you signed a side agreement moving a private consulting fee into a shell you control, timed to the sale you're signing in the back room right now. A murmur, sharp, ran through the press. That's not restructuring, Julian. That's a kickback. I have the wire memo. So do the people walking toward you. 2 figures in plain clothes had appeared at the edge of the hall, near the security door, and Julian saw them see him, and he sat down very slowly. Fail. Adriana Vargas. She flinched before I even said the sentence, flinched first, the way the weak link always does. 2 weeks ago, you and Julian manufactured a scandal. You planted a story that a young writer named Kira Shaw leaked unreleased tracks, so you could fire her before tonight and silence the one voice in that room brave enough to defend the rest of it. Up in the last rows, a young woman went very still. I retrieved the originals you shredded. I have the session logs with your login on the file you found. Kira Shaw never leaked anything. You did, and then you handed her the knife. I looked at Kira, up in the dark, and I said it to her as much as to the room. That fabrication is void, effective now. Kira, come down. You've been reinstated by the only person who can. Fail, Adriana. But you flinched. Remember that. That's the only reason you get a next chapter. I moved on before the room could catch its breath, because a good song doesn't let you catch your breath. It takes you where it's going. Owen Sterling. I found him at the back, and to his credit, he had not moved, because men like Owen Sterling believe until the last possible second that the story is still theirs. Meridian Sound Capital. In the room behind that door, you have a contract on a table that would buy this catalog tonight, gut this writing team, release these session players, and license every song in it into ads and bargain bins forever. The songs stripped of the names of the people who bled them out at 3 in the morning. I let the room hear that. I let the last rows hear it. You learned that playbook from your father, Arthur Sterling. 12 years ago, his fund bankrolled the exact same move, at smaller scale, on a smaller writer. Buy the talent cheap. Delete the author. Own the catalog forever. My voice did not change. That was the thing I had spent a decade practicing. You handed me your coat on the way in tonight, Owen. You didn't look at me. Your father wouldn't have looked at me either. That's the flaw in the family. You never look at the person holding the coat. I set my hand flat on the podium. So here is the part your due diligence missed. That catalog isn't Julian's to sell. It hasn't been for years. A holding company called Northlight Publishing quietly acquired the controlling interest in this catalog and the underlying publishing rights, song by song, hit by hit, over 10 patient years. I looked out at the buyers, at the press, at the elite, at the last rows, and I told them the thing I had been carrying alone for a decade. I am Northlight. The songs you came to sell tonight already belong, in law and in fact, to the woman you sat in the last row and told to clap. The back room. I need you to see the 2 rooms at once because I lived them at once. Behind the door, on that table, was the pen. I had already made the call, hours ago, quietly, the way I do everything, but the killing move I saved for the light, so the room could watch it land. The Meridian sale is halted, I said into the microphone, and I watched Owen Sterling's phone light up in his hand as, backstage, his own counsel got the same notice I was giving the world. There is no deal. There was never a deal to be had. You cannot buy what the seller does not own. I turned to the last rows. The session players are not released. The writer's room is not consolidated. Effective right now, this minute, on the record, in front of the press this label invited to watch their triumph, the catalog stays exactly where it is, and the songs stay with the people who make them. That is not a proposal. That is a decision by the rights holder. That is me. And the last rows, the writers, the players, the backup singers, the invisible artisans who had come in their good shirts to watch themselves be sold, the last rows began, one by one, to stand. Not for Celeste. For the first time in that hall, not for Celeste. Which brings me to Celeste. She was still standing beside me, holding her golden statuette, and she had not put it down, because she did not yet understand that it had never been hers. I turned to her, and the room turned with me. 1,000 faces swinging like one instrument. "You want the proof," I said, not to her, to all of them. "I know how this works. A demo girl says she wrote the songs, and the machine says, sure she did. Unstable, difficult, a credit thief. They said it about me once. It worked once." I keyed the small console still live at my hip. Of course I had kept a channel open. I was running their soundboard. I had been running their soundboard for 10 years. "So listen." I brought up the master. Not Celeste's polished vocal. The buried track. The one under the mix. The layer no one is meant to hear. And out over that gold hall rolled a woman's voice. Low and true, singing one word, over and over, under the chorus of the biggest song of the decade. "Remember. Remember. Remember." "That's my voice," I said. "It's in every real one I wrote. The Rights Society has the metadata registered under Jade Autumn on every hit this label has claimed for 10 years. Dates, files, the 3-note motif in the second bar, a signature you can read like a fingerprint if you know it's there. I made sure it was always there. I signed everything. You just never learned to read my handwriting." Then I turned to Celeste directly and I lowered my voice, because the cruelest things are quiet. 12 years ago, you took the December sessions. My debut. The truest thing I ever made. You put your name on it, and your people had me branded a thief so no one would believe the real one. And it cost me my name, my record, my partner, everything but the songs. And you couldn't take the songs, Celeste, because you never actually had them. You only had the polish. So, I held the microphone out toward her across the podium into the light. "Sing it. The December sessions, the first line, the one you stole. Sing it for the room." She opened her mouth. Nothing came. "You don't know it," I said softly. "You never did. You've had my name in your mouth for 12 years, and you never once knew the song under the polish. Sing the first line you stole. Sing it." The statuette trembled in her hand. Her lips moved and made no sound, and 1,000 people watched the right voice discover it had nothing to sing, and somewhere in that silence, the truth of the last 12 years arrived in the room all at once, the way weather does. I took the microphone back. The hall was on its feet now, not the polite surf of before. Something else, a rising, ragged, astonished sound, the sound of a room that has just watched the furniture stand up and speak, the sound of every person who had ever been told to clap for someone else's name, realizing that a door had just been kicked open from the inside. At the security door, they were walking Julian Hayes out quietly. Owen Sterling was already on his phone, watching his father's playbook collapse in his hands the way it had built itself in his father's, the generational circle closing on the exact spot where it began. Adriana Vargas had both hands over her mouth, and up in the last rows, Kira Shaw was coming down the aisle toward the light, and Leo Asante was on his feet whistling like a man at a rescued show. And Silas Croft, old Silas, who had once engineered a doomed girl's demo and stayed silent to keep his job, and never forgiven himself for it, and never known he was looking at her. Silas Croft was standing very still with his hand pressed flat over his heart, and on his face was the look of a man hearing, at last, the end of a song he'd carried unfinished for 12 years. I looked out at all of them. At the buyers with their name cards, and the press with their red lights, and the elite in the front row, and the makers in the back. At the faces. I had studied those faces for 10 years from the dark side of the glass. I knew which of them ordered coffee for the room, and which drank it while the room went without. I knew who was kind when the red light was off, and who was only ever performing kindness for someone who could promote them. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off, and only the song is left. I had found out about every single one of them, 1-3 a.m. at a time, and I had written it all down in a ledger they never knew I kept. They had spent a decade certain I was no one. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. That was the whole trick. That was the only trick I ever needed. I had spent 10 years learning their faces. Now, for the first time, they learned mine. Chapter 8. The Song Remembers. The morning after you tell the truth on live television, the world does not end. It just gets very quiet, and then very loud, in that order. I woke at 3:14 a.m. out of 10 years of habit, before the reveal had finished trending, and lay in the dark listening to the building breathe. No red light, no booth, just the hum of the refrigerator, and a city that had learned my name overnight, and didn't yet know what to do with it. I had spent a decade deciding things in that hour. I found I still had one more thing to decide, not who to destroy. That part was already moving, the way a chord resolves whether or not you're still touching the keys. The thing I had to decide was who to keep. The mornings brought their invoices. They came for Julian Hayes first, because paper is patient, and Julian had signed a great deal of it. I want to be precise, because precision is the only kind of justice I trust. I did not put Julian Hayes in handcuffs. He put himself there, one wire transfer at a time, taking a private consideration from Meridian Sound Capital to push a catalog sale that would gut the room he was paid to protect. I'd had the records for months, quiet in a Northlight folder, the way you hold a note you're not ready to play. On the stage, I had only named the shape of it. The regulators filled in the rest, because once a man is humiliated in front of the entire industry, a great many people who signed things next to him suddenly remember they have lawyers. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, an undisclosed interested party transaction he'd sworn in writing did not exist. The kickback was the load-bearing lie, and when it went, the whole facade came down with the tidy, total collapse of a set being struck after closing night. I was there when they walked him out of the tower. Not by design, I'd come to clear a locker they'd assigned to vocal support staff. Julian came down in the same elevator I was waiting for, flanked by two people in unremarkable coats, and for one honest second, he looked at me and did not recognize me at all. The demo girl, furniture with a nice voice. Then it landed, the way it had landed on all of them the night before, that slow horror of a man rereading a room he thought he understood, and he said my name like a question. Ilara. Mr. Frame. I didn't smile. Cruelty would have been a kind of intimacy, and I owed him none. You told the press you built this company on instinct. I nodded at the coats. That was your instinct. Fail. He didn't answer. There was nothing in the ledger to write. Adriana Vargas. I graded differently because Adriana had flinched. She'd flinched first. On the night of the reveal, I'd watched her hand come up to her mouth a full beat before the room understood what it was hearing, as if some part of her had been waiting years for the correction, and was, God help her, relieved. She lost the role anyway. You cannot spend a decade calling human beings the demo situation and the help, and keep the corner office when the help turns out to own the building. The board didn't even have to push her. The story did. And PR people, of all people, understand a story that is turned. But Adriana did one thing on her way out that I will not forget. She came to the back room 3 days later, when the tower was still on fire and everyone with any sense was pretending they'd been on my side the whole time. She didn't pretend. She put a slim gray folder on the console in front of Leo and me and said, "This is the original chain of custody on the Kira thing, the real dates, who sent what to whom. I kept it because I always keep everything, and I'm giving it to you because I'd rather you have it than them." The Kira thing. The forged plagiarism scandal they'd built to fire a 24-year-old before she could become a problem. The one piece I'd rescued from a shredder but couldn't fully authenticate from the outside. Here it was, authenticated from the inside, by the woman who'd helped assemble the lie and now, too late to be brave, chose honesty. Why? I said. Not a question, a test. Because someone did it to a girl years ago, Adriana said, and I heard the stories and decided it wasn't my business. And I've spent this whole week trying to remember her name and I can't. And that's the part I can't live with. That there was a name and I let it become a story with no name in it. She looked at me. She still didn't know it had been mine. Don't let it happen to this one. I took the folder. It won't, I said. And then, because grading is the only mercy I know how to give, "You're late, Ms. Ruiz, but you came." I didn't say the word. She'd have to earn it. But I let her hear that there was one to earn, and she nodded like a woman handed a deadline she intended, this time, to meet. Owen Sterling did not come to the studio. Owen Sterling sent lawyers, and then he sent a proposal, and then, when neither worked, he sent himself, which was the only interesting thing he did, and only because it was the last. I need to tell you how Meridian Sound Capital actually died, because it did not die the way people think. People think I stood on a stage and canceled a deal with a sentence. That's television. What actually happened is quieter and much worse for Owen, which is to say, it's real. Meridian's entire thesis was leverage. You buy a catalog cheap, You borrow against its future licensing. You gut the humans who made it because humans are a cost and a melody is an asset. And you service the debt off ads and compilations forever. The songs become collateral. His father, Arthur Sterling, had built the machine, had, 12 years ago, bankrolled the men who took the December sessions from me and turned my name into a warning label. Also, a fund could own a catalog free of the inconvenient person who wrote it. Buy the talent cheap. Erase the author. Own the songs. It had worked on me at 24 when I had no lawyers of my own. Here is what neither Sterling ever checked, because men who buy catalogs do not read the fine print in the registry. They pay other people not to. For 6 years through Northlight, I had been quietly acquiring the underlying publishing rights and a controlling copyright interest in the very catalog they were leveraging. Not the masters the label waved around. The songs, the words and the melodies, registered under Jade Autumn, the actual legal spine of the thing Meridian planned to borrow a fortune against. You cannot collateralize what you do not control. On the morning after the awards, when Meridian's lenders woke to the small news that the controlling rights holder of the flagship catalog was not the distressed label they'd been promised, but a private holding company that had just, on live television, declared it would license nothing into ads and would not sell, the leverage evaporated. The debt did not. Meridian had borrowed against a house it could not deliver clean title to, and the fund, which lived on the confidence of people who lend against certainty, ate the loss. That isn't a trick at all. It's just a woman reading the contracts she was told to sign and never read aloud. And then, 10 years later, quietly buying the paper back 1 page at a time. Owen came to say the thing men like him always come to say, which is that we were, at bottom, the same. He found me at the studio at night, the only time I'm ever truly at home, stood in the doorway of the back room in a coat that cost more than the room's rent, looked at the amps and the cold coffee and the water stains, and smiled like a man appraising a teardown. My father, he said, would have admired you. Your father paid to erase me, I said. I'd hate to have earned his admiration on top of it. You did the same thing he did. You bought the catalog. You waited. You let the machine run until it was time to close the trap. He spread his hands, generous, terrible. That's us, Ms. Keane. We're not so different. I let him have the silence a moment, because he'd bought so many things and I wanted him to feel, just once, what it was to receive something he could not. Here's the difference, I said. Your father's machine bought talent cheap and erased the author so the fund could own the song. I spent 10 years buying back the song to give it to the author. You collateralize people, Mr. Sterling. I collateralized your leverage. I picked up his coat from the console where he'd draped it without looking, the way he'd handed it to a demo singer once, without looking, and held it out to him. You handed me your coat and didn't see my face. Your father did the same thing to a 24-year-old, and it cost him nothing for 12 years. It cost you the fund. The circle's closed. I met his eyes. Fail. Generationally. He took the coat. He didn't put it on. And Owen Sterling, managing partner of a firm that no longer existed by the end of the quarter, walked out of the only room he'd ever mistaken for something small, and I never saw him again except in the trade filings. Celeste Thorne was the hard one. She had always been the hard one. Because Celeste's crime is the one the law has never quite known what to do with. She didn't embezzle. She didn't forge a contract or take a kickback. She took credit. She stood in front of a decade of my life and said, I write from the heart, and let the world hand her the flowers, and there is no statute for that, no cell, no fine that makes a person unlie. Julian had paper. Owen had leverage. Celeste had only ever had a voice and a name, and the terrible thing about her sentence is that it had to be built out of the same materials. So I did not try to jail her. I did something worse, with the registry, which is the only altar I've ever really believed in. The Golden Score's Songwriter of the Year is drawn from the Right Society's record of authorship. For 12 years, in the metadata beneath the December sessions and every hit that followed, in the place where the truth lives and no stage light reaches, there had been a name where a name should be, and it had not been hers, and only I had known. On the Monday after the show, the Society did what it exists to do. It corrected the record. Jade Autumn reconciled to Elara Vance. My name went into the ledger where hers had been borrowed, in the one archive that outlasts every poster and every stage. She asked to see me. I don't fully know why I said yes. Eleanor always said a song is a true thing you leave behind. And some part of me needed to leave the truth with Celeste in person rather than let her hear it from a filing. She was smaller in the studio than she'd ever looked on a stage. They all are. That's the secret the back room keeps. They're going to reissue everything, she said, with your name on it. Yes. I sang those songs for 10 years. Her voice cracked, and I understood, with the closest thing to pity I could manage, that she believed this was an argument. People cried to them, got married to them. My voice is why they mean anything. Your voice is very good, I said, and meant it because precision. It was never the question. The question was whose truth you were singing. I stepped closer. 10 years I'd rehearsed 100 cruel things for this moment, and standing in it, I wanted none of them. Only the one true thing. Say it, Celeste. Not to the press. To me, in the room where they were made. Say the sentence you've never once said in 12 years. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd said the other sentence 1,000 times. A song is nothing until the right voice sings it, and never once its opposite, because its opposite was the only thing that could end her. Her mouth worked. The room waited. The tube amps hummed their warm, forever note. I never wrote a line, Celeste Thorne said. Not one. Not ever. And that was the whole sentence. No cell would have held it half as long as those 6 words were going to hold her. Every time she heard a song of mine in a car, at a wedding, at a funeral, for the rest of her life, furniture with a beautiful voice, now correctly labeled. She would have to sing along like everyone else, and know she was singing my name. Fail, I said, but softly, without the ledger's steel, because a verdict that true doesn't need volume. Go home, Celeste. She went. And I stood alone in the studio and let myself feel, for one held breath, the thing I'd refused to feel for a decade. Not triumph, which is loud and cheap, but the quiet of a thing finally set down. Then I got to work, because the coda is the part that matters, and I had a room to build. Kira Shaw cried when I told her. Then she got angry, which is the right order, and demanded to know why I'd let her get fired. Let her sit in the wreckage of a lie for 3 days believing her career was over, when I'd had the proof the whole time. It was a fair question, and I gave her the true answer. I needed them to write the lie down completely, in ink and metadata, so that when I lifted it, there would be nothing left to argue. I would never have let it stand, I told her. But I needed them to finish signing it. I'm sorry for the 3 days. I'll be sorry a long time. She heard that it was true. She's like me that way. She can hear the difference. I made her head of the writer's room, A&R lead over the Reborn catalog, with a real title and real royalties, and, more to the point, real power to make sure the next gifted 24-year-old in the back of the booth is a name and not a story with no name in it. Adriana's folder cleared her completely. The industry that had been ready to bury her as a leak spent a frantic week rebranding her as a survivor, which is its only reliable talent. Kira let them. She's better at it than I ever was. The session players kept their livelihoods. That was never negotiable. That was the whole war. Leo Asante runs the room now. Leo, who recognized me first, who saw the 3-note motif in an old hit and the scar on my hand and the demo tape marked E. Vance, and put it together in a single, terrible, wonderful afternoon and never once told a soul. Leo, treated now finally like the sharpest mind in the building because she is. She had a plaque made for the console. No one works this room alone. She won't tell me if it's a rule or a threat. Both, I think. We renamed the room. Not the label. I let it keep its dull corporate name because a corporation is not a home. But the room, the real one. The back room where the truth gets made at 3 a.m. We took down the plastic sign that said Studio C, Vocal Support, and put up brass. And the brass says Northlight Room, the Ruth Keane Studio. Northlight for the company that quietly bought back every stolen song. And Eleanor for the woman who taught me what a song was before the industry taught me what it cost. My grandmother, the gospel choir pianist and church songwriter whose own name got sanded off 100 hymnals by men who thought a woman at a piano was furniture with a gift. The first erased maker in a line I'd spent my whole life protecting. I hung her photograph on the wall by the booth, where every writer who comes through has to pass it. In the old church records, they'd listed her, when they listed her at all, as accompanist. I had a new plate engraved for the frame, her name, her dates, and one word underneath: writer. She'd have laughed at the fuss. Then she'd have sat down and shown us all up, humming the fix before she played it, the way I still do, the way Kira's already started to. Silas Croft found out who I was the way I should have let him find out years ago, from me, at night, with the red light off. Silas, who'd engineered a doomed debut demo 12 years ago and never forgot the songs and never once recognized the woman who wrote them behind different glasses and a harder face. Silas, who'd confided to me, of all the impossible people, his one guilt. A young writer years ago whose songs he'd watched get taken while he stayed silent to keep his job. He'd said I reminded him of her. He'd said it kindly. It had nearly broken me every time. I brought him into the Eleanor Vance studio at 3 a.m., the hour that belongs to us, and put on the old master. The real December sessions. Not the polished theft the world knew, the demo, the one with my scratch vocal and the buried backing line singing one true word under the chorus, the signature I've hidden in every honest thing I've ever written. He listened with his eyes closed, the way real engineers do. And when the backing line came up under the chorus, that one true word, his hand found the edge of the console like a man steadying himself on a moving floor. "I know this," he said. "I've known this for 12 years. I have a tape of this. I kept—" He stopped. He opened his eyes and looked at me, actually looked, the way almost no one in this business ever has, and I watched him solve it, the last man to learn my face, and the only one who'd loved the songs the whole time without ever needing to know they were mine. "It's you," he said. "It was always you. It was always me." He was quiet a long time. Then he said the thing I'll keep longer than any award, plain and a little broken. "I kept your demo for 12 years. I didn't know it was yours. I just knew it was the real thing, and I couldn't throw the real thing away." He shook his head. "I stayed silent for a paycheck once, and I've hated myself for it every day since. Let me not be silent about this one. You're the real thing, Ilara. You always were. I just wish I'd said it out loud when it might have saved you." "You're saying it now," I said. "That's the only thing that ever counts." And I put my hand over his on the console, the scarred hand, the one Leo recognized, and neither of us said anything else, because we're studio people, and the truest things we know how to say we say in the mix, in the space under the chorus, in the one word you have to lean in to hear. Pass, I thought, and didn't need to say it. He'd have heard it anyway. He always could. The reissues came out in the spring, my name where hers had been, and the world played my songs at its weddings and its funerals exactly as before, and not one thing about the songs had changed, and everything about them had. I still write. That's the part people don't ask about, because they think the story ended on the stage. It never ends on the stage. The stage is where you're seen. The song is where you're true, and those have never been the same room. I write one a season now, by hand, at 3 a.m., in the notebook nobody reads, with the red light off and the coffee going cold, and Eleanor watching from the wall with her one good word under her name. I don't have to hide them anymore. I hide them anyway, the signature, the buried line, the one true word under the chorus. Not out of fear now, because that's where I've always believed the truth belongs. Not on the poster, not in the light, but underneath, where you have to love the song enough to lean in and find it. Kira caught it last week. She was mixing something of her own at 4 in the morning, and she stopped and pulled her headphones half off and said, "There's a word under the chorus. You buried a word." She looked at me like she'd found a door in a wall she'd known her whole life. "Everybody does this? Or just you?" "It's just me," I said, "and now it's just you." I handed her the notebook, the one nobody reads, open to a blank page. The chain only stays unbroken if someone hides the truth on purpose, so it survives the people who'd steal it. Your turn. Bury something true where no stage light reaches. Then teach the next one. She took the notebook like it weighed more than it did. It did. Celeste was right. I'll give her that at the very end, because I grade honestly or not at all. A song is nothing until the right voice sings it. So I stopped giving mine away. I put my name back, not on a poster, not in a stage light, but in the metadata and the melody, in the registry and the buried line, where the truth lives and no red light ever reaches. You find out who someone really is at 3 in the morning, when the red light is off and only the song is left. So do I. Pass.